Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The virtual crowd roared in unison, their holographic banners shimmering in bright neon hues, displaying Alex Turner sending. Alex stood on a raised platform in the center of the city square, but not in reality. His avatar gleamed in the perfect artificial light of the digital world. Here in the vast expanse of the government's utopia, everything looked pristine. People smiled without a care in the world, dressed in immaculate clothes, their faces free of worry. The virtual utopia was perfection in every pixel. But perfection had its price. Alex's voice boomed over the vast square. What you see here, its size all a lie, and I will not stop until every citizen knows the truth. His words reverberated through the seamless streets, though they were carefully coded not to breach any of the utopia is built-in censorship filter. The election for the new global council was just weeks away, and Alex knew the stake. But the citizens in the VR world weren't aware that beyond the confines of this digital paradise, there existed a decaying real world. Alex's message cut through the illusions. He was the only candidate daring to question the system, the only one willing to expose the cost of their comfort. After the rally, Alex deactivated the connection to his VR rig, removing the visor from his sweat-covered brow. His small, dim apartment greeted him, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the digital stage. The room was cold, metal walls lined with minimal furniture. The reality here was harsh. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the mission ahead. A sharp knock echoed on the door. Alex tensed his hand, instinctively reaching for the hidden knife under his desk. But it wasn't the secret police. It was Eva Limline. She stepped inside with her usual brisk, almost robotic energy, her eyes never staying still as they scanned the room. Eva was more than just his campaign advisor. She was the key to unraveling the government's control. A hacker with unrivaled skills. She had once been on the other side, working for the regime until the system took everything from her. You shouldn't have done that, Eva said, her tone a mix of anger and concern. What the speech? Alex asked, pushing himself off the chair. They were watching you closer than ever, she said, tossing a small tablet onto the table. Here, new data from our contacts in the lower districts, they've confirmed it. Alex stared at the screen, his eyes darkening as the images played. In the lower districts, those left behind in the physical world, people were enslaved in squalid conditions, working endlessly to maintain the infrastructure that powered the utopia. They labored in factories, warehouses, and energy plants, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow. It was their suffering that kept the VR paradise alive. Perfect world, he muttered under his breath, all built on their back. And the regime is erasing anyone who speaks out, Eva said coldly. That's why they will come for you next. I am not backing down, Alex said, eyes hardening. I am going to bring this whole thing crashing down. Eva's expression softened just for a moment. I'll be with you until the end. She pulled up another screen, her fingers swiping across data points. I've cracked the encryption on the VR security grid. We have a window. If we can get inside the central hub, we can broadcast everything, show them the truth about the lower district. They'd shut it down before we get the chance. Not if we plan it right. Alex paced the room, his mind racing. The truth needed to come out, but if they failed, the consequences would be devastating, not just for him, but for the dissidents, for the people who still believed in freedom. The election, he murmured, stopping in his tracks. We need to do it during the final debate. It's the one moment when everyone is watching. Eva raised an eyebrow. You mean hijack the debate? That seemed dangerous. That's why it'll work, Alex said, his face set in determination. We'll hit them when they least expect it. Eva worked tirelessly, hacking into the regime, Sci-FiWorlds, tracing their every move. Meanwhile, Alex continued his campaign, all the while knowing that the real battle wasn't for votes, it was for the truth. As the day of the debate approached, Alex met secretly with Thomas Vega, a low-ranking official in the regime who had grown disillusioned with President Marcus Lee. Tomas was their inside man, the one who could give them access to the government central server. Are you sure about this? Alex asked, meeting Tom as in the shadowy back alleys of the real-world city. The tall, gaunt man looked older than his years, the weight of his discontent visible in his sunken eye. If you're asking whether I want to die a traitor or live a liar, I choose the former, Tomas said, his voice hoarse. The people deserve to know what's really going on. This isn't life, it's in the digital prison. Alex nodded. We were counting on you. Tomas handed Alex a small device. This will bypass the first firewall. After that, it's side up to your hacker. I want to fail, Eva said, her tone steely as ever. The debate was held in the virtual world, a grand spectacle designed to showcase the candidate's strength. Marcus Laren, the reigning dictator, appeared as the ideal leader, his avatar radiating confidence, his features sharp and clean. Beside him, Alex looked ordinary by comparison. His simple suit and weary expression, a stark contrast to the polished grandeur of the incumbent president. As the debate began, Marcus Lie's words flowed like honey. He spoke of unity, peace, and the perfection of the utopia. The audience, both virtual and real, ate it up. Alex stood quietly, waiting for the right moment. Then the signal came from Eva. It was time. Alex stepped forward, interrupting Marcus mid-sentence. "You talk about perfection," Alex said, his voice cutting through the digital air. "But the truth is, UV built this world on lies." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus Lie smirked, unfazed. "Lies, the only lie here is that you think you can offer something better." "Let me show you what I mean," Alex said, his heart pounding. He activated the device Thomas had given him, sending the pre-programmed signal to Eva. For a moment, the virtual world flickered, then the broadcast feed changed. Instead of the pristine, perfect cityscape, images of the lower districts appeared: starving workers, crumbling buildings. The grim reality of the real world lay bare for all to see. The crowd gasped. Marcus Lie's smirk vanished. "This is the truth," Alex shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. "This is the price of your so-called utopia. This is what they don't want you to see." In an instant, alarms blared across the virtual world. The regime's security forces scrambled to shut down the broadcast, but it was too late. The images spread like wildfire, leaking into every corner of the digital network. People began to question the world they thought they knew. Fear, anger, and confusion rippled through the masses. Marcus Lie, now visibly enraged, pointed a finger at Alex. "You will pay for this." Before Alex could respond, his virtual feed was cut, and the world around him dissolved into darkness. When Alex opened his eyes, he was back in his cramped apartment, the VR visor discarded on the floor. He could hear the distant sounds of sirens outside, the regime already on the move. "They were coming," Eva said, her voice tight with urgency as she packed up her equipment. "We knew this would happen," Alex replied, his pulse still racing. "But the truth is out there now. They can. Trish, stop it." Eva paused, her hands still for a moment. "But they'll try to stop us." Alex didn't respond, his mind already racing ahead. They had struck the first blow, but the war was far from over. Eva worked quickly, her fingers moving over the terminal with practiced speed, dismantling the equipment they had used for the broadcast. The sirens outside grew louder, a constant reminder that the regime wasn't going to let them walk away easily. Alex paced the room, every nerve in his body on edge. His mind raced, knowing their next moves had to be precise, or everything they do accomplish could collapse in an instant. "They were tracking the signal back to this location," Eva said, her voice low, almost too calm. "We need to be gone 5 minutes ago." Alex ran his hand through his hair, the weight of what they'd done still sinking in. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and nodded. "Let's move." The door burst open as they slipped into the narrow alleyway behind the building, barely ahead of the security forces that descended on the apartment. The night sky was cloudy, the dense smog from the lower districts choking the air. They ran, sticking to the shadows, weaving through side streets and alleyways that twisted like a labyrinth. The city in the real world was nothing like the pristine, utopian VR paradise. It was cold, dark, and oppressive. Eva led the way, her knowledge of the city's layout flawless, her movements precise. "There's a safe house a few blocks from here," she said without looking back, her voice steady even as the tension mounted. Alex glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of figures in the distance, the regime's security forces in pursuit. "They were gaining on us." "They want to catch us if we keep moving," she replied, her pace quickening. The safe house was a small, dilapidated building tucked between two factories, barely noticeable amidst the urban decay. They slipped inside, bolting the door behind them. The room was sparse, just a table, a few chairs, and a couple of cots. Thomas Vega sat in one of the chairs, waiting for them. His face was gaunt, pale under the dim light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. "They've declared you a terrorist," Tomas said, getting straight to the point. Alex didn't flinch. "I expected as much. How bad is it?" "Bad," Tomas said. "They were calling it a national security breach. They've locked down the central VR hub. No one's from getting in or out of the system until they can scrub the footage." Eva scoffed. "Scrub it. It's already out there." They can undo what's been seen. They'll try it, Tomas said, his voice grim. They were good at controlling the narrative. They've already started broadcasting counter messages claiming the footage is doctored, a manipulation by dissident. Alex sat heavily on one of the chairs, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He knew they wouldn't just lay down and accept defeat. But hearing at the speed with which they reacted, the lengths they'd go to still hit hard. So what's then the next step? Eva crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing in thought. We need to hit them again. Harder this time. How? Alex asked. The VR hub isn't just the center of the virtual world, she explained. It's also where they store all their data. If we can get in, we can pull the files. They don't want anyone to see. The records of how the lower districts were systematically destroyed, the exploitation, the human rights violations, everything. Thomas looked uneasy. That place is a fortress. Getting in would be suicide, maybe Eva said, but it's the only way to stop them from rewriting the narrative. Alex leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. If we expose them again with undeniable proof, we can turn the tide. People won. Be able to ignore the truth any longer. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples. If you're going to do this, you will need my help. I still have access to some of the inner security protocol. It won't be easy, but I can get you past the outer defensive. Eva nodded, her expression resolute. We'll need to move fast. They'll tighten security after tonight. The next night, under the cover of darkness, Alex, Eva, and Tomas made their way toward the central VR hub. The building loomed like a monolith in the distance, a towering structure of sleek metal and glass, glowing faintly in the city. Smog choked air. It was heavily guarded, just as Thomas had warned, with security drones circling overhead and armed guards posted every entrance. Ava moved ahead, hacking into the building's outer systems from a remote terminal. Give me a second, she muttered, her fingers flying over the key. I'll shut down the surveillance feeds for 2 minutes. That's all the time we've got. Tomas glanced nervously at the armed guards. 2 minutes isn't a lot. It's all we need, Alex said, steeling himself for what was to come. The moment Eva gave the signal, they moved. The guards didn't see them, their attention distracted by the sudden blackout in the surveillance system. They slipped through the front entrance, Tomas leading the way to a maintenance corridor that bypassed the main security checkpoint. The interior of the building was stark cold. The hum of machinery echoed through the halls as they made their way deeper into the facility. Eva hacked into one terminal after another, unlocking doors and bypassing security systems with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. When they reached the data center, Tomas' hand trembled as he scanned his iPad. This is as far as I go, he said, his voice thick with fear. If I go any further, they will know it was me. Alex clapped him on the shoulder. You've done more than enough. Get out of here before they catch on. Tomas nodded and slipped away, disappearing back into the maze of corridors. Inside the data center, Eva immediately got to work, plugging into the main terminal. This is it, she said, her voice hushed with concentration. Once I start downloading, they'll know we were here. We won't have much time. Do it, Alex said. The screen flickered as the data began transferring for a moment. Everything was still. Then the alarms blared. They're coming, Eva said, her eyes locked on the screen. We need to hold them off until the download is complete. Alex positioned himself at the door, ready for the inevitable confrontation. He had no weapon, but desperation fueled him. They were too close to give up now. The first wave of guards arrived, their boots thundering down the hall. Alex grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, using it as a makeshift weapon. He swung it with all his strength as the guards breached the door, catching one in the face. Another guard lunged at him, but Alex ducked, slamming the extinguisher into the man's gut. Almost done, Eva shouted over the chaos. More guards poured in, and Alex said, arms grew heavy from the effort. He was outnumbered, exhausted, but he fought on, knowing that this was the only chance they had. Suddenly the room went silent, the screen blinked, and the transfer was complete. We got it, Eva said, her voice breathless. Without hesitation, they bolted from the room, sprinting down the corridors as the guards gave chase. The hall seemed endless, the exits too far away, but they kept running, adrenaline pushing them forward. They burst through a side door, spilling into the night. The cold air hit Alex's face like a slap, but they didn't stop. They ran until their lungs burned, until the shouts of the guards faded into the distance. Finally, they collapsed in an alleyway, gasping for breath. Eva held up the small data chip, a triumphant smile on her face. We did it. Alex leaned back against the wall, his heart still pounding now. We show the world what they've been hiding. The release of the data was like a bomb going off. It spread through the digital networks, a tidal wave of truth that couldn't be stopped. The footage of the lower districts, the records of human rights violations, the undeniable proof of the regime's exploitation, it all came crashing down on the government. People who had once been content in their virtual paradise began to wake up to the reality they had ignored for so long. Protests erupted in both the real and virtual worlds. The regime's grip on power weakened with every passing day. Marcus Live appeared on every podcast, desperately trying to control the narrative. But it was too late. The people had seen the truth, and they wouldn't be silent. As the regime crumbled, Alex stood before a crowd once more, this time in the real world. The faces that looked back at him weren't the perfect avatars of the VR utopia. They were real people, flawed, scarred, and human, but they were free. The truth is out, Alex said, his voice carrying over the crowd. Now it's set up to us to build a world where we don't need illusions to survive. The cheers that followed were real, just like the world they were finally ready to reclaim. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The city of Horizon was a marvel of modern engineering. Towering skyscrapers lined the streets, their smooth glass surfaces reflecting the dazzling sunlight. Drones buzzed through the air like mechanical bees, constantly scanning the populace below. Holographic screens hung from every corner, blasting out messages of unity, security, and prosperity courtesy of the People's Communist Party. But underneath the pristine veneer, a suffocating layer of fear lurked. Evan Lee stood in the bustling square, his eyes trailing the floating projections that declared the coming election the fairest and most transparent in history. It was a laughable statement. Every citizen knew that the result had already been decided long before anyone cast a vote. The Communist Party would win, they always did. But Evan wasn't laughing. His hand clenched around the campaign flyer he'd been handing out, the words "Peace on a New Future" printed in bold red letters across the top. The paper crinkled under his grip, a physical representation of his frustration. As an independent candidate, Evan had expected a tough fight. What he hadn't anticipated was the overwhelming sense of helplessness that came from competing against a machine designed to control every aspect of life, down to the thoughts and people said. "Excuse me, Mr. Lee," a voice interrupted his brooding. He turned to face a middle-aged man, his eyes darting nervously toward the surveillance drones overhead. "I just wanted to say I am rooting for you. We all are." The man gave a quick glance around and then hurried away, disappearing into the crowd before Evan could thank him. It was like this everywhere he went, small moments of support followed by swift retreat. The fear of being seen supporting an opposition candidate was real, and Evan understood it better than most. He had grown up in this system, and for years he had lived within its rule. But now, as the election neared, the pressure had reached a boiling point. Evan exhaled slowly, tucking the flyer into his coat pocket and heading toward his campaign headquarters. It wasn't much, a small nondescript office located on the edge of town, but it was the heart of his movement. His team of volunteers worked tirelessly, preparing for speeches, debates, and rallies. It was all they had left, a thin sliver of hope against the looming shadow of the party. As he entered the office, he was greeted by the familiar hum of voices and the tapping of keyboards. His campaign manager, a wiry woman named Grace, looked up from her desk. "We got the final debate schedule," he said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "They moved it up by a week." Evan raised an eyebrow. "A week? Why?" Grace shrugged. "Maybe they think it'll give them an edge. Who knows? But we'll be ready." Ready for met out a dry laugh. "Against them. We're lucky if we even make it to the stage without some technical difficulties wiping us off the screen." Grace's expression hardened. "They've come this far. We're not backing down now." Evan nodded, his jaw tightening. She was right. They couldn't type back down. Not now. Not after everything they fought for. Later that night, as Evan sat alone in his office, his laptop screen illuminated his face. He scrolled through the latest news articles, his mind racing with thoughts of the election. It was then that something strange caught his eye, a data feed from the party's internal server. It was a glitch, a flicker of something out of place for a moment. He thought it was just his tired eyes playing tricks on him, but then it happened again. A line of code, out of sync, popped up on the screen. Curiosity got the better of him. He clicked on the feed, watching as the system spat out more data names, locations, vote count. It was election data, but not just any data. This was the real-time manipulation of vote. The party wasn't just controlling the election. They were actively rigging it in plain sight, confident that no one could ever detect the system set hidden backdoor. His pulse quickened. This was it. The evidence he had been searching for. Suddenly, the screen went black. A warning flashed across the display, unauthorized access detected. Report to the nearest authorities for questioning. Evan cursed under his breath and slammed the laptop shut. They knew they had seen him. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to calm down. He couldn't leave now, not when he was so close to the truth. The next morning, Evan met with Grace in the back room of the campaign office. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "Something's going on with the party's surveillance system. I found a way in just for a moment, but it was enough. They re-manipulating the election data." Grace's eyes widened. "You real sure?" "Positive, and they know I saw it." "Then you need to lie low. If they catch wind that you've found a way into their system, you won tree, just lose the election, you will disappear." Evan nodded grimly. "I know that's why I need help. I need someone who understands their system better than I do." That sigh when Grace leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone, a former software engineer who worked for the party. She's been off the grid for years, but if anyone knows how to expose the system's flaws, it's her. Who is she?" "Her name is Sophia Soklan." Evan's heart skipped a beat. He had heard the name before, a brilliant coder who had vanished after a high-profile fallout with the government. Rumors swirled about her disappearance, but no one knew the truth until now. "How do I find her?" Grace hesitated, then handed him a slip of paper with an address. "She lives in the old industrial district. Be careful, if the party knows you re-looking for her, they'll stop at nothing to silence you both." With a nod of determination, Evan took the paper and left the office. His mind was racing. This was his only chance, and he couldn't afford to waste it. The industrial district was a far cry from the glittering city center. Dilapidated factories and crumbling warehouses lined the streets, their windows broken and doors rusted shut. The once thriving area had been abandoned years ago, left to rot as the party focused its resources on the more profitable parts of the city. Evan approached the address. Grace had given him a nondescript building with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. He knocked on the door, his nerves on edge. Moments later, the door creaked open, and a woman appeared in the doorway. Sophia Vignac. She looked older than the pictures he'd seen, her once sharp features softened by years of hiding. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, scanning him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. "Evan Lee," he said, stepping forward. "I am running in the election. I need your help." She raised an eyebrow. "The election, your time, the party, Science already decided the winner." "I know," and replied, "but I also know how they were doing it. I've just seen the system, and I've now found a way to expose them." Sophia's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Evan thought she might turn him away, but then she stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the room was cluttered with old computer equipment, wires snaking across the floor like veins. Sophia sat down at a terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "So you've found the back door," she said, her tone matter of fact. "How did you—" "Because I built it." She didn't bother looking up from the screen. "Years ago, when I still worked for the party, they wanted a system that could track and control everything: votes, dissent, even emotion. I gave them what they wanted, but I also gave them an out-of flaw in the system. I thought it might save us one day." "Save us from what?" "From ourselves," she said softly, finally meeting his gaze. "But the system became too powerful, and when I tried to fix it, they came for me." Evan swallowed hard. "We have to expose this. People need to know." Sophia shook her head. "It's not that simple. The moment you go public with this, they'll kill you. You will disappear, just like all the others who tried to stand up to them. Then we will have to be smarter than them," Evan said, his resolve hardening steer. "We'll find a way to reveal the truth." Sophia studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Harry, but if we do this, there's no going back. I'll be marked for death." I already am, Evan replied grimly. Shall let's get started. They spent the next few hours poring over the surveillance system, identifying weaknesses and vulnerabilities that could be exploited. As they worked, a plan began to take shape, a way to broadcast the truth to the entire city without being detected. But they both knew the clock was ticking, the party was watching, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. The hours stretched into the night, the quiet hum of Sophia's old computers filling the room. Evan sat beside her, eyes glued to the screen as code flashed in front of him. He had always considered himself tech-savvy, but what Sophia was doing was on another level. She moved through the system like she had built it, which of course she had. "This will get us in," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before tapping the last few keys. "We can override the vote manipulation algorithms and force the system to reveal the real results in real time." Evan nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on his chest. "What about broadcasting it? They control all the media channels. Even if we expose it, how do we make sure that people see it?" Sophia's lips tightened, her mind already racing through possible solutions. The party's media network is impenetrable, but the surveillance drones, they transmit everything in real time to central hubs. If we can access one of those feeds, we could hijack their own surveillance footage. Evan finished for her, the idea sparking a faint glimmer of hope. Use their eyes against them. Sophia nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "It's risky. The moment we breach the surveillance network, they'll know. We'll have maybe a few minutes before they track us down." Evan stood, pacing the small space. "Then we make those minutes count. We need to time it right when the most eyes will be on us." His mind drifted to the upcoming debate. "The debate is only a week away if we can time it for that." Sophia sat back in her chair, considering it. "The debate will be broadcast live. Every drone in the city will be tuned in. We hijack the feed then and there. There's no way they can stop the truth from getting out." It was a plan as fragile as it seemed, but with the clock ticking and no other options in sight, it was the only move they had left. The next few days blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. Evan barely slept, running through his speeches, rallying the last of his supporters while keeping a low profile. Meanwhile, Sophia worked tirelessly to finalize the breach, her fingers never leaving the keyboard for more than a few minutes at a time. The tension in the city was palpable as the debate day approached. Holograms of the party's candidate, Minister Cheng, flickered in every public space, his voice booming from every loudspeaker. The party's iron grip on the city seemed tighter than ever, as if they sensed that something was brewing. Evan had been careful, making sure his public appearances were brief, never staying in one place for too long. But the party's surveillance was relentless, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they closed in on him. On the morning of the debate, Evan met with Sophia one last time. They had set up their base of operations in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, where the surveillance was thinner. It was the safest place they could find, though safe was relative. "Everything's ready," Sophia said, her voice low and steady. She looked more tired than he had ever seen her, but her determination hadn't wavered. "Once the debate starts, I'll trigger the breach. You will have the floor." Evan nodded, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him. He didn't know if this would work. He didn't know if they would survive the day. But he knew they had to try. "I'll be ready," he said, though his voice betrayed the nerves crawling under his skin. Sophia glanced at him, her gaze softening. "You don't have to do this. If something goes wrong." At one T, Evan cut her off, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "We've come this far, there's no turning back now." The warehouse door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. Grace? She'd been coordinating the final details of Evan's campaign while keeping her ear to the ground for any signs that the party was closing in. "They were watching," she said without preamble, "every street, every corner. The drones are everywhere. If you show your face at the debates, they'll be on you in seconds." Evan took a deep breath. Good, let them watch. By the time evening fell, the city was buzzing with anticipation. The debate was being held at the Grand Plaza, a towering structure designed to accommodate hundreds of viewers in person, though the real audience was the millions watching from their homes, their workplaces, and every screen the party controlled. Evan stood behind the curtains, waiting for his name to be called. Minister Cheng had already taken his place on stage, his polished smile and confident posture projecting the image of a man in complete control. The party candidate, the guaranteed winner in every rigged election, was delivering his well-rehearsed speech to an audience that had no choice but to listen. Evan's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He had one shot, one chance to expose the truth. He could feel the weight of the flash drive in his pocket. The key to the surveillance system sounded downfall. Sophia was watching from the warehouse, her fingers poised over the keyboard, ready to initiate the breach the moment Evan stepped onto the stage. And now our final candidate for this evening, Evan Lee, the moderator, announced. The crowd's applause was polite but subdued as expected. The party's set influence ran deep, and most people were too afraid to show any real enthusiasm for an independent candidate. But as Evan walked out into the spotlight, he wasn't looking for applause. He was looking for drones. He spotted them immediately, dozens of them, hovering above the plaza, their lenses trained on the stage. They were broadcasting the debate live, feeding the party a carefully curated version of events into every home in the city. Evan took his place behind the podium, his heart hammering in his chest. He glanced at Minister Cheng, who gave him a smile that didn't reach his eye. "Good luck," Mr. Li Cheng said, his voice dripping with condescension. Evan ignored him. He cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. I stand before you not just as a candidate, but as a citizen of the city, a city that deserves the truth." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the flash drive. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Sophia's voice crackled in his earpiece. Evan pressed a button on the flash drive, and in an instant, the world around him shifted. The drones hovering above the plaza blinked, their feeds interrupted. For a few brief seconds, the screens across the city went black. Then, without warning, the surveillance network's live feed burst onto every screen in the city. Gasps rippled through the crowd as images of vote manipulation, citizen disappearances, and covert government operations flooded the airwaves. Evan's voice echoed through the chaos. "The party has been controlling every aspect of our lives, including this election. But now you can see the truth." Minister Cheng Song's smile faltered, and for the first time that night, fear flashed across his face. He took a step toward Evan, but it was too late. The damage was done. The truth was out, and there was no way to stop it. The crowd erupted into chaos, people shouting and pointing at the screens as they realized what had been hidden from them for so long. Evan stood tall, his heart racing as he watched the city awaken to the truth. But he knew it wasn't over. The party wouldn't go down without a fight. Evan, Sophia's voice shouted in his ear, "They be coming for you. You need to get out of there now." He turned just in time to see the armed guards rushing toward the stage, their guns drawn. The drones above them whirred to life, switching from passive surveillance to active pursuit. Evan's heart pounded in his chest as he leaped off the stage, weaving through the panicked crowd. His earpiece crackled again. "There, son, alley to your left. Go." He sprinted toward the alley, his legs burning with the effort. Behind him, he could hear the shouts of the guards and the whir of the drones closing in. But he couldn't stop now, not when the truth had finally been exposed. He ducked into the alley, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The darkness enveloped him, and for a moment, he thought he might have lost them. But the whirring of the drones grew louder, their lights cutting through the shadow. "Keep moving," Sophia's voice urged. Evan pushed himself forward, his muscles screaming in protest. Just a little further, just a little more. A blinding light filled the alley, and Evan's heart sank. The drones had found him. He braced himself, ready for the end. But then out of nowhere, a figure appeared in front of him, grabbing his arm and pulling him deeper into the shadow. It was one of the silent ones. "Come with me," the figure whispered, dragging him toward a hidden door in the side of the building. "We were not done yet." Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the heart of Nova Imperium, the distant colony, where democracy had long since withered, Liam Torres stood before a crowd of hopeful faces. He gripped the podium with white-knuckled hands, his voice steady but his heart racing. The large dome above them reflected the cold light of the distant stars, and it felt as if the entire universe was watching this moment. For the first time in decades, a candidate not aligned with the People's Unity Party dared to challenge the iron grip of the government. Liam wasn't a revolutionary by nature. He had been raised in a modest family taught to respect authority, to believe in the system. But something deep inside him, a gnawing doubt, had grown over the years. The elections held every 10 years always seemed predictable. Every speech, every debate, every vote ended the same way: the People's Unity Party in control and the opposition silent. No scandals, no uprisings, no real debate, just the same stale faces, grinning behind the podium. But this time, it would be different. He looked out at the faces of those who had come to hear him speak. His father sat in the front row, his mother's seat conspicuously empty, a reminder of the sacrifice she'd made years ago, working in one of the government labs until a mysterious accident claimed her life. His sister Sophia stood nearby, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. She had always been the cautious one, warning him not to dive too deep into the political quagmire, but Liam couldn't ignore the call any longer. As citizens of Nova Imperium, Liam's voice rang out, filled with conviction. We have been promised freedom. We have been promised democracy. But what kind of democracy is it when the same faces, the same names, always end up in power? What kind of freedom do we have when our voices are muffled, our votes meaningless? A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Liam could see nods, whispered words exchanged between onlookers. His message was resonating for the first time. Someone was challenging the party's hold on the colony. The People's Unity Party, he continued, has controlled this colony for over 50 years. But have we ever questioned how they do it? Have we ever asked why no one ever wins against them? Today, I'm asking those questions. Today, I'm standing up for real democracy, for a future where our votes truly matter. Applause erupted. It wasn't deafening, but it was real. There was hope in their eyes. And Liam felt a spark of energy run through him. He was doing it. He was making them see. But as his eyes scanned the crowd, they fell on someone who made his heart skip a beat. Alyssa Varga. She stood off to the side, her sharp features bathed in the artificial glow of the streetlight. Her gaze was locked on him, unreadable. Once they had been close, inseparable. Even she had been his confidant, his rival, and his best friend. But now, as the representative of the People's Unity Party, she was his greatest opponent. Liam's voice faltered for a moment, and his thoughts raced. What happened to you, Alyssa? She had changed. The vibrant, passionate woman he once knew seemed to have been replaced by someone cold, mechanical, even. Every time he saw her speak, her words felt rehearsed, her emotions distant, as if a veil had been placed over her true self. Shaking off the distraction, Liam refocused. There was no time for nostalgia. The stakes were too high. Later that evening, after the speech had ended and the crowd had dispersed, Liam found himself walking the quiet streets of the colony's capital. The towering buildings, made of gleaming metal and glass, stretched high into the sky, their structures illuminated by neon lights and holographic displays that flickered with government-approved slogans. The Unity for Progress, the York to Unread, for stability. Stability, that was the word they always used. Stability at the cost of freedom. Stability at the cost of truth. As he rounded a corner, a voice called out from the shadow. Liam. He froze. The voice was soft, familiar. Alina Davakova stepped into the light, her face partially obscured by the hood of her long coat. Her eyes, however, were sharp, glittering with intelligence and urgency. Elena Liam greeted, wary but curious. She'd been a former government scientist, one of the few who had defected from the Unity Party, Inner Circle, years ago. Since then, she had lived in the shadows, always watching, always waiting. We need to talk, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Liam hesitated but nodded, following her down a narrow alley that led to a dimly lit bar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and cheap alcohol. It was a place for the forgotten, the downtrodden, the people the party preferred to ignore. They sat in a corner booth, the low hum of conversation around them masking their words. Alina wasted no time, leaning in close and speaking in a hushed voice. Your speech tonight began. Was a good start, but it won't be enough. Liam frowned. What do you mean? Elena's eyes narrowed. You think this is just about rigged elections? It's much worse than that. The elections are a farce, yes, but they were not just controlling the votes, they were controlling the leaders themselves. Liam stared at her, confused. Controlling the leaders. Elena leaned back slightly, her expression grim. Genetic modification. For a moment, Liam couldn't process what she was saying. It sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory. That's impossible. Is it? Elena's side voice was icy. Do you know how many candidates have run against the Unity Party over the years? Dozens. Do you know how many of them have disappeared? How many have changed overnight after winning their elections, suddenly becoming loyal puppets of the party? Liam shook his head, his mind reeling, but they win. The opposition candidates win sometime. Elena's lips twisted into a bitter smile. Yes, they win, and then they disappear, only to return as perfect obedient servants of the party. Because the moment they win, they're retaken to the Unity Institute, where they undergo genetic reprogramming. Their minds are altered, their free will erased. The party doesn't just rig the elections, they control the winner. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. This couldn't be true, but as he looked into Elena's eyes, he saw no hint of deception, only cold, hard truth. How do you know this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I was part of the program, she admitted, years ago before I defected. I worked on the genetic modifications. I helped them develop the technology. But when I realized what they were using it for, I couldn't stay. I couldn't be part of it. Liam leaned back in his seat, trying to wrap his mind around the enormity of what she was telling him. Genetic control. The leaders weren't just corrupt. They were being controlled at the biological level. I can prove it, Elena said quietly, but you need to be willing to expose it. Once you do, there's no going back. Liam's breath caught. He had always known that standing against the party was dangerous, but this was far beyond anything he had imagined. If he exposed this, he would be putting his life and the lives of everyone he cared about at risk. But he also knew he could turn away. The truth had to come out. What do I need to do? He asked. Elena's eyes gleamed with determination. We need to break into the Unity Institute. That's where they store the genetic records. If we can access them, we can expose everything. The plan was reckless, dangerous, and borderline suicidal, but for Liam, it was the only way forward. Over the next few days, he and Elena meticulously mapped out their approach. The Unity Institute was one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the colony, and breaching its security would be nearly impossible, but with Elena's insider knowledge, they had a slim chance. As they prepared, Liam couldn't help but think of Alyssa. She had once been as passionate as he was, eager to make a difference. They had shared dreams of a better future, a future free from the party's sense control. But now she was a shadow of her former self, her loyalty to the Unity Party unshakable. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to her, something beyond simple brainwashing. Could she have been reprogrammed? The thought sent a chill down his spine. On the night of the infiltration, the air was heavy with tension. Liam and Elena donned black tactical suits, their faces obscured by masks. They moved through the shadows, avoiding security drones and patrols as they approached the towering structure of the Unity Institute. Inside, the building was cold and sterile, a maze of corridors and laboratories. Elena led the way, her knowledge of the facility's layout guiding them through the labyrinthine hall. Every step was a risk, every corner a potential death sentence. At last, they reached the heart of the Institute, the central database, where the genetic records were stored. A massive, cylindrical room lined with holographic terminals and data servers. The hum of machinery filled the air, the glow of the screens casting eerie shadows. Elena began hacking into the system, her fingers flying across the interface. Liam stood guard, his heart racing as he listened for any signs of approaching security. Finally, the screen flickered to life, revealing rows upon rows of names, candidates who had been modified over the years. Liam's stomach turned as he scanned the list, recognizing some of the names. These were people he had looked up to, people he had admired, all of them puppets of the party. And then he saw it. Alyssa Vargas. Her file was there, just like the others. Modified, reprogrammed. Liam felt a wave of nausea wash over him. She had been taken, just like all the others. The vibrant, passionate woman he had once known had been turned into a puppet, her free will stolen from her. Elena, Liam whispered, his voice hoarse. We need to save her. Elena glanced at him, her expression conflicted. There's no going back for them, Liam. Once they ramified, it's permanent. The changes are in their DNA. But Liam refused to accept that there had to be a way. He couldn't just abandon her. As they downloaded the data, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls. Security had been alerted. The footsteps grew louder, pounding like a drum in Liam's ear. He tightened his grip on the small blaster he carried, the weight of the weapon suddenly much heavier in his hand. Elena worked furiously, her fingers moving faster than he thought possible as she tried to extract the last bits of data from the system. The seconds stretched into eternity. "Theory coming," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible above the whir of the machines. His breath felt thick in his throat. Elena didn't look up. Just a few more seconds, almost there. The door slid open, and 3 heavily armed guards stepped inside, their weapons trained on them instantly. Liam Sauer's heart leapt into his throat and instinct took over. He fired. One of the guards crumpled to the floor, but the others took cover behind the doorframe, returning fire with brutal precision. "Liam," Elena shouted, her voice strained. "We need more time." He ducked behind a console, his pulse hammering in his ears. Shots rang out, ricocheting off the metal surfaces around them. The air smelled of burnt circuits and gunpowder. Liam leaned out just enough to squeeze off another shot, but missed as the guards advanced. His mind raced. They were running out of time. They needed to get the data and get out. But the security team was too well coordinated. Elena Shee's voice cut through the chaos. "Got it." Without thinking, Liam reached for her arm. "We need to move now." They sprinted toward the back of the room, searching for an exit. The guards were right behind them, and the sound of blaster fire echoed through the hall. Liam's lungs burned as he ran, but the thought of failure of leaving Alyssa and the others trapped under the party's control pushed him forward. He wasn't just running for his life. He was running for the truth. Elena led the way through the twisting corridors, every step a gamble. They had no time to stop and consider alternate routes or hidden exit. Every second counted. Just as they turned a corner, a blaster bolt narrowly missed Liam, hitting the wall beside him and sending a spray of sparks into the air. He ducked instinctively and fired back, forcing the guards to hesitate, long enough for them to gain some distance. "I have a contact outside," Elena panted as they reached a narrow maintenance tunnel. "If we can make it to the transport hub, we can disappear before they lock down the entire district." Liam Sauer's heart pounded in his chest. "Lead the way." They sprinted through the dimly lit tunnel, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. For a moment, it felt like they might actually make it. But as they neared the end of the tunnel, the door slid open, revealing 2 more guards blocking their escape route. Liam fired first, hitting one in the shoulder, but the other managed to get a shot off, grazing his side. He gritted his teeth through the pain as he fell behind a metal support beam. Elena tossed him a look, her eyes wide with fear but focused. "We can't all get caught here." Liam nodded, forcing himself to focus. Blood seeped through his shirt, but the wound wasn't deep. It could still move. He had to. Elena took the lead, tossing a small explosive toward the remaining guard. The concussive blast rocked the tunnel, and Liam felt the shockwave rumble through his bone. The guard crumpled. You ascended through the opening, through the hole. The exit led to the outer perimeter of the Unity Institute, where the cold night air stung Liam's skin. The transport hub was only a few hundred yards away, a sleek platform where autonomous vehicles waited to ferry officials and staff to the various government facilities scattered across the colony. They just needed to reach it before security could lock down the area. Elena had already hacked into the transport's controls before they arrived. As they neared the platform, the doors of one vehicle slid open, beckoning them to safety. But Liam couldn't stop thinking about Alyssa, about the files he had seen. He couldn't leave without knowing if there was a way to save her. "Elena," he said, breathless, as they boards hit the transport. "Is there any way we can reverse it? The modification?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she busied herself with the transport's control panel, initiating the autopilot sequence that would take them to a safe house in the city, Sonnerbelly. It wasn't until they were a few miles away, the lights of the Institute fading in the distance, that she finally spoke. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've seen cases where the modifications were so deeply embedded in the subject's genetic structure that trying to reverse them would kill the person." But she hesitated, glancing at Liam there. "Something in the data we downloaded, something I didn't mention, a new program they were testing." Liam Sauer's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of program?" Elena leaned back in her seat, her expression dark. They were experimenting with something called a neural override. It's a fail-safe. If the modifications start to break down, the party can activate this override and effectively erase the subject, else personality completely wipe their mind. It's a last resort if they ever sense rebellion. They were planning to use it on Alyssa. The weight of her words hit Liam like a physical blow. Alyssa wasn't just brainwashed. She was on the verge of being erased, her mind obliterated, if the party deemed her too much of a risk. "We have to stop them," he said, his voice shaking with urgency. "There has to be something in that data, some way to undo what they've done." Elena didn't respond immediately. She knew the risk, the near impossibility of what Liam was asking. But she also knew they had no other choice. If they didn't try, Alyssa's fate would be sealed along with any hope of exposing the party. Send manipulation. "We'll need to decode the files," she said quietly. "It'll take time." Liam nodded, determination hardening in his chest. Time was something they didn't have much of, but if there was even the slightest chance of saving Alyssa, he would take it. The transport docked in a nondescript part of the colony's industrial sector, far from the glittering towers of the Unity Party, says elite. Here in the forgotten corners of Nova Imperium, people lived on the fringes, scraping by in the shadow. It was the perfect place to hide, but it was also a reminder of everything Liam was fighting, for these were the people the party had abandoned, the ones who had no voice. They made their way to the safe house, a small dilapidated structure hidden among the warehouses and supply depot. Inside it was sparse, but functional. Elena immediately set up her equipment, connecting the data they had stolen to a secure network, decrypting the files piece by piece. As the hours stretched on, Liam's sad mind wandered back to Alyssa. He remembered the fire in her eyes when they were younger, the way she had spoken so passionately about change, about a better future. He couldn't reconcile that memory with the woman she had become, a hollow shell, loyal to the party, without question. The thought that she could be saved, that somewhere, deep inside, the real Alyssa still existed, was the only thing keeping him from collapsing under the weight of everything they had learned. Elena worked tirelessly, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface as she decoded line after line of data. The more she uncovered, the more horrifying the truth became. The party's own control extended far beyond just the leaders. They had plans to expand the modifications to the general population to ensure total obedience across every sector of society. But amidst the nightmare, there was a glimmer of hope. "I found something," Elena said, her voice low but charged with urgency. Liam moved to her side, his heart racing. "What is it?" She gestured to a section of the data, highlighting a specific sequence of genetic code. This is the key. It's such a prototype for a counter-modification, a way to block the neural override and potentially reverse the effects of the genetic reprogramming it sets. Experimental, untested, but its own chance. Liam finished for her. It sounds something. But the window of opportunity was closing fast. They had already been discovered at the Institute, and it was only a matter of time before the party tracked them down. If they were going to save Alyssa, they had to act now. Armed with the prototype, Liam and Elena devised a plan. It was risky, insanely so, but it was the only way. They would have to confront the party head-on, infiltrate their headquarters, and use the counter-modification on Alyssa before the neural override could be triggered. It was a mission that could get them both killed, but if they succeeded, it would expose the party's entire operation and give the people of Nova Imperium a fighting chance. As they prepared for the final confrontation, Liam's mind raced with everything that had led him to this point. The corruption, the lies, the manipulation. He had always known the system was broken, but he had never imagined the depth of the control the party wielded. Now, with the truth in his hands, he was ready to fight for more than just himself. He was fighting for Alyssa, for his family, for everyone who had been silenced. They moved through the city's underbellies, staying out of sight as they approached the Unity Party. Central compounds, the security was tighter than anything they had faced before. But Elena's expertise in hacking systems gave them a fighting chance. The compound loomed ahead, its sleek, impenetrable walls gleaming under the cold lights of the city. This was the heart of the regime, the place where decisions were made, where lives were controlled. It was here that Liam would make his stand. He and Elena slipped through the outer defenses, moving like shadows through the compound's corridor. Every step brought them closer to Essa, closer to the moment of truth. When they reached the chamber where she was being held, Liam's silent heart pounded in his chest. Alyssa stood at the center of the room, her expression blank, her eyes distant. She didn't react when they entered. The neural override hadn't triggered yet, but the clock was ticking. Liam approached her slowly, his voice soft, desperate. "Alyssa, it's me, it's Liam." Her gaze flickered, but there was no recognition. His heart ached. He had to reach her, had to break through the walls the party had built around her mind. Elena quickly set to work connecting the prototype to the terminal that controlled the modification. "I need a few minutes," she said, her voice tense. "Just hold on." Liam stood in front of Alyssa, his voice trembling with emotion. "Alyssa, I know you were still in there. I know the real you is still fighting. You have to fight." For a moment, he thought he saw something, a flicker of recognition in her eye. But it was fleeting, and she remained still, her body rigid, her mind locked away. Elena worked frantically, the tension in the room unbearable. Liam's eyes never left Alyssa, his voice a constant plea, a lifeline he prayed she would grasp. And then suddenly she blinked. Her expression shifted ever so slightly. It was small, but it was enough. Liam, her voice was barely a whisper, but it was her, the real Alyssa. Tears filled Liam's eyes. "I am here. I am right here." But before they could celebrate, alarms blared through the compound. The party knew they were there. Reinforcements were on the way. "Elena," Liam shouted, panic rising in his chest. "I am almost done," she replied, her voice strained with concentration. As the door to the chamber slid open, guards flooded in, weapons raised. Liam grabbed his blaster, ready to defend Alyssa with everything he had. The fight wasn't run over yet. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The crowd was electric, filled with hope, anger, and something Daniel hadn't seen in a long time, believe. As he stood behind the podium, the wind swept through the park, rustling the hundreds of signs held high by his supporters. They had come from all corners of the country, people from all walks of life who were sick and tired of being ignored, lied to, and manipulated. The nation had gone through so much decades of promises, false hope, and an ever-tightening grip on their freedom. Daniel Carr was different, and everyone in the crowd knew it. He wasn't a career politician, he wasn't one of them, and that's why the ruling party hated him. As the leader of the Freedom Coalition, Daniel had fought tooth and nail to get his message out, to show the people what the current government was doing. But it hadn't been easy. Every time he thought he was gaining ground, they found a way to knock him down. Media outlets would suddenly refuse to cover his rallies. Articles online would vanish or be flooded with comments from bots, calling him a liar, a fraud, a radical. But none of that mattered anymore. Daniel could feel it. The people were waking up. Taking a deep breath, he gripped the sides of the podium and leaned forward, his voice carrying over the sea of faces. They think they control you. They think they can tell you what to think, how to feel, who to vote for. But they were wrong. His words echoed through the air, and the crowd erupted in cheers, fists pumping the sky. For too long, we've been fed a lie, the lie that we are free, that we have a choice. But behind closed doors, there is a system that decides the outcome before the first vote is even cast, a system that keeps us divided, distracted, and powerless. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, but not anymore. The crowd roared louder this time. Daniel's heart raced. This was it. He could feel the shift. The momentum was building, and he had no intention of slowing down. Backstage, Nina Hartman watched with a mix of pride and anxiety. She had been by Daniel's side since the beginning, a political advisor with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She knew what they were up against, and every instinct told her that something wasn't her, right? The ruling party had been too quiet. They hadn't launched a smear campaign, no surprise attacks in the media, nothing. It was as if they were waiting for something. As Daniel finished his speech and waved to the crowd, Nina slipped through the curtains and caught his eye. He knew that look. It was the look that said, "We need to talk now." They met backstage, away from the cameras and microphone. "That was incredible," Nina said, though her tone didn't match the praise. But Daniel pressed, raising an eyebrow. Nina sighed. "But something. I don't like it. They haven't even tried to hit back. It's not like them. You know how they operate: smear campaigns, leaked scandals, anything to distract the public." Daniel frowned, glancing back at the stage where the crowd was still chanting his name. Maybe they were running scared. Maybe they know they can stop us this time. Or maybe they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Daniel didn't respond. He knew Nina was right. The ruling party, the Communist Party that had held power under the guise of democracy, wasn't one to sit idly by. They had perfected the art of manipulation, using the media and internet censorship to control the narrative and keep the people in line. But Daniel had something they didn't prep. I don't too care what they were planning, Paul. He finally said, are we read too close? The people are with us. We can't. Nina's expression softened, but the worry lingered in her eyes. Failed Lee, just be careful, okay? We've had seen what they can do. Daniel nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He needed to keep pushing, keep exposing the lies. They couldn't too hide forever. That night, in the dimly lit war room of his campaign headquarters, Daniel sat hunched over his laptop. The dim light from the screen illuminated his tired face, and his eyes scanned through pages of leaked document. Nina sat across from him, her fingers flying over the keys of her own laptop. Anything? She asked, not looking up from her screen. Just more of the same. Daniel replied, frustrated. They control everything, the media, the internet, social media platforms. It's all rigged. Nina clicked her tongue. We knew that already. We need something bigger, something concrete that we can use to blow this thing wide open. Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. There has to be more. They can't just be using the media to control people there. Something deeper, something we weren't seeing. As if on cue, Nina's laptop pinged. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. Daniel, you need to see this. He stood up and walked around the table, leaning over her shoulder. On the screen was a series of emails encrypted, but recently decrypted by one of their tech-savvy supporters. The emails weren't from the ruling party or any government official. They were from a private group of individuals discussing media control, internet algorithms, and election manipulation. But what caught Daniel's eye was the name at the bottom of the chain, the shadow government. What the hell is that? Daniel muttered, his eyes narrowing. Nina's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Organization, not officially part of the government, but they were the ones pulling the string. They were controlling everything, the media, the elections, even public opinion. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the proof he needed. They were not just manipulating the system, he said slowly. Over the next few days, Daniel and Nina dived deep into the shadow government set operation. They discovered that it wasn't just a few media outlets or social media platforms under their control. It was an entire network of corporations, tech giants, and political figures who had banded together to maintain power at any cost. They controlled the algorithms that determined what people saw online, the news cycles that shaped public opinion, and even the electoral process itself. Every election had been a farce, with results predetermined by the shadow government long before the first vote was cast. This is huge, Nina said one night as they sat in the darkened office, poring over more documents. If we can get this out to the public, it will blow the whole thing wide open. Daniel nodded, but his mind was racing. They were not going to let us do that. If we tried to release this, they'd come after us. Nina leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Then we don't give them the chance. We go public with it all at once. Flood the internet. Every platform, every news outlet we can find. They want to be able to stop it. Daniel shook his head. They control the platforms. They'll shut us down before we can even hit send. Not if we get help from the inside, Nina countered. They met with underground resistance groups, hackers, and journalists who'd been blacklisted for trying to speak out. Slowly but surely, they built a network of allies who were willing to risk everything to expose the shadow government. But as Daniel's campaign gained momentum, strange things began to happen. His phone calls were interrupted by static emails disappeared. His house was broken into, but nothing was stolen. It was clear. The shadow government knew they were getting close. Nina was nearly abducted one night, grabbed by two men in black suits as she left the campaign office. She fought back, managing to escape, but it was a stark reminder of the dangers they were facing. They were trying to scare us, Nina said as she nursed a bruised wrist. Yeah, but we were too far in to back out now. By the time Election Day approached, Daniel and his team were ready. They had compiled all the evidence, every document, every email, every bit of proof they could find. They had hacked into the major news networks, ready to broadcast the truth to the world. But the shadow government had one final trick up their sleeve. Here ends the first part of the shadow government. Stay tuned for the intense final showdown as Daniel faces the ultimate challenge in his fight for the truth. The day before the election, Daniel could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. He hadn't slept more than a few hours in the last week, and the constant surveillance from the shadow government was taking its toll. Yet as he stood in the cramped campaign office with Nina and a handful of trusted aides, he knew they had to move forward. There was no turning back now. We were set to broadcast at 8 p.m., like Nina said, her voice low but steady. She was tapping away at her laptop, coordinating with the underground networks and resistance hackers. We'll push the files through every news channel we've ever hacked, and we've got a backup system ready in case they shut down the first wave. Daniel nodded, running a hand through his hair. So good. This is our last shot. If we don't make this public, they'll bury it and us along with it. The room was tense, the air thick with anxiety. The hum of computers and low murmur of voices filled the small space. They all knew what was at stake. They weren't just exposing election manipulation. They were revealing a conspiracy that went to the very heart of the nation's identity, a truth so dark and dangerous that it would shake the foundations of power. Daniel's voice broke through his thoughts. We've got a problem. He turned, finding her staring at her screen, her brow furrowed. Freya, what is it? The Vez started their counterattack. Nina pushed her laptop toward him, showing a series of news articles and social media posts. They were all about Daniel, none of them true. They've ever released deepfake videos of you. You're remaking racist comments, inciting violence, calling for an armed revolution. God damn it, Daniel muttered under his breath, his hands curling into fists. I knew they'd pull something like this. They flooding every platform with it, Nina said. Daily shit's already trending on social media. People are calling for your arrest. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush him. The lies, the manipulation, it was everything they'd been fighting against. And now it was happening to him, right in front of his eyes. Is there anything we can do? He asked, knowing the answer before Nina even spoke. Not much, she replied, her voice grim. The deepfakes are too good. We could try to counter it, but with the way the media is stacked against us. Daniel rubbed his temples, the pressure mounting. This was their final move, their attempt to discredit him, to make him out as a radical before he could expose them. And it was working. We push forward anyway, Daniel said after a long pause. We get the truth out. People will see through their lies, eventually. Nina nodded, though her expression remained wary. Freya will be at that 30 minutes until the broadcast once it's live. There's no going back. Daniel stared at the clock on the wall. 30 minutes. In that time, everything he'd worked for, everything they'd sacrificed, could be destroyed, or it could be the moment they finally turned the tide. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Daniel paced the room, going over the plan in his head again and again. Outside, the streets were quiet, an eerie calm before the storm that was about to hit. At precisely 8 p.m., Nina gave the signal. It's live, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel watched the screens light up as their broadcast went out. News channels, social media platforms, blogs, everything they'd hacked into was now showing the truth. Leaked documents scrolled across the screens, emails from the shadow government's inner circle detailing their manipulation of elections, media, and public opinion. It was all there, undeniable proof of the conspiracy. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the first news anchors reacted: confusion, disbelief, shock. The internet exploded as people shared the files, the story spreading like wildfire. We did it. Daniel breathed, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had won. But then the lights in the office flickered. Nina's fingers froze on her keyboard. The power went out. Shit, someone cursed in the dark. Daniel scrambled for his phone, turning on the flashlight as Nina frantically tried to reboot her laptop. Outside, they heard the distant wail of sirens. Daniel's heart sank. They were coming for us, Nina said, her voice tight with fear. They've cut the power and the internet. They were trying to shut it all down. How much got out? Daniel asked, his mind racing. Enough, Nina replied. But they will try to suppress it. We need to get out of here before they find us. Without another word, Daniel grabbed his jacket and motioned for the others to follow. They slipped out the back of the office into the alley, the night air cool against their skin. The city felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of chaos. As they ran through the dark streets, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every shadow felt like a threat, every corner a potential ambush. He knew the shadow government would stop at nothing to silence them. But he also knew that the truth was out there. Now the people had seen it, and no amount of censorship could fully erase that. They made it to a safe house on the edge of the city, a small, nondescript apartment where a trusted ally was waiting. Jonas Weller, a high-ranking media executive, stood by the window, looking out over the dimly lit street. "Jonas Dede," Daniel said, out of breath. "Is it bad?" Jonas turned, his face grim, attached. "Chaos out there. The government's trying to spin the story, but it's too late. People are in the streets. Protests are starting to pop up all over the country." Daniel leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. They'll come after us next. Jonas nodded. "I've got contacts who can get you out of the city, but it won't be easy. They'll be looking for you everywhere." Daniel shook his head. "I am not leaving, not yet." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "We're not exactly in a position to negotiate," Daniel tapped. "I don't care," Daniel shot back. "Right now they'll say I was guilty all along. I need to face them. I need to stand in front of the people and tell them the truth, no matter what the shadow government throws at me." Nina stepped forward. "She's already, if we run, we lose everything we've asked for." Jonas stared at them for a long moment before sighing. "Honey, you were both crazy, you know that." "Maybe it's else," Daniel said. "But we didn't come." They spent the next few hours monitoring the situation from the safe house. The protests were growing, spreading from city to city. People were demanding answers, calling for the resignation of government officials, for investigations into the media and tech giants that had been complicit in the conspiracy. It was working. The truth was finally breaking through the lie. But Daniel knew it wasn't over. The shadow government would regroup, and when they did, they would come at him with everything they had. Dennis said quietly, "You were going to need more than the truth to win it." Daniel looked at him, confused. Jonas sighed. "The people might believe you now, but the system is still in place. The media, the elections, the politicians, they were all still under the control of the shadow government. You've exposed them, but not going to just roll over and let you take them down. You were going to need power, real power." Daniel frowned. "What kind of power?" Jonas leaned in, his voice low. "There are powerful people who hate the shadow government just as much as you do. People with money, influence, connections. If you can get them on your side, you might just stand a chance." Daniel considered his words carefully. He had always believed that the truth alone would be enough. But maybe Jonas was right. Maybe the only way to defeat the shadow government was to use their own tools against them. "I'll think about it." Jonas nodded. "Just don't take too long. The clock's ticking." As dawn broke over the city, Daniel stood by the window watching the streets fill with protesters. This was just the beginning. The fight for the nation's soul had only just begun. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Mars had always been a red planet, but for Alina Vasquez, it had never felt redder than that. The Mars colony, built on promises of equality and shared prosperity, was rotting under the grip of the Communist Party. They controlled the oxygen, the water, and the energy, all the things that made survival possible on this barren, frozen wasteland. Alina had watched her father and younger brother die because of it, suffocating in a system designed to starve the poorest of what little they had. That was the spark that ignited her rebellion, and she would be damned if she let it die out now. She stood before a crowd in the lower sectors, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edges of the makeshift podium. Behind her, the air recyclers hummed, barely keeping up with the demand for breathable air. These were the sectors where the oxygen was thin and water was rationed. These were the people who had been left to wither under the iron grip of Premier Nikolai Grigorov's regime. "Every day, they tighten the noose around our necks," Alina said, her voice gaining strength. "Every day we have to beg for the basics, air, water, energy, while the rich in Sector 1 live like gods, but it's not because there isn't taka enough, it's because they control it. They control us." A scried a mix of men and women with hollow eyes and sunken cheeks murmured in agreement. These were people who had seen their children die from dehydration, who had watched family members choke as the air thinned during one of the frequent technical malfunctions that always seemed to hit the lower sectors hardest. Alina's words were fire, and they needed that heat more than they needed anything else right now. But we can change it. We can stop being their pawns in this rigged game they call an election. But first, we have to stand up. We have to fight back. In the back of the crowd, Sergei Makarov watched her with wary eyes. He had seen this kind of passion before, and it didn't always end well. But Elena had something different. She had courage. More than that, she had proof that could topple the regime if used the right way. Sergei had worked as an engineer for the government, fixing the very air recyclers that kept this sector alive. He knew the system inside out. He also knew that the resource allocation wasn't too random. It was manipulated. The party was tightening the supply in certain sectors, using it as leverage to force votes, keeping the population under control. The election was nothing more than a puppet show. He had seen the coding that directed where resources went, and it was all tied to voting patterns and loyalty to the party. He had come to Elena 3 weeks ago, his face gaunt, his eyes full of guilt. She was the only candidate in years who had dared challenge the party's monopoly, and the only one with enough fire to stand a chance. Together, they formed a partnership. She would be the face of the movement, and he would be the brains behind the scene. After the rally, they met in the shadows of an old ventilation shaft hidden from the ever-watchful eyes of Gregorov's enforcer. Elena wiped sweat from her brow, her hand shaking from the adrenaline still rushing through her veins. "They believe in you," Sergei said quietly. Elena nodded, though the weight of their belief felt like a burden she wasn't sure she could carry. "We need more than belief. We need the truth to come out." Sergey's hand trembled as he pulled a small data chip from his pocket. "This is it, the proof of everything, the resource allocation algorithms, the fraudulent voting codes, the entire system. Once this goes public, they can't hide anymore." Elena stared at the chip, a tiny piece of metal that held the potential to bring down the most powerful regime on Mars. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was what they needed, but it was also what made them a target. Premier Gregorov wouldn't toss it idly by and let her expose him. She knew the risks, but they had gone too far to back down now. "We'll release it on the night of the election," Elena said, her voice firm. "Once the results are rigged and everyone sees it for themselves, the whole colony will rise up. They won't stand for this anymore." Sergei nodded, though his expression remained grim. "You need to be careful, Elena. Gregorov won't let you get that far without a fight. He will do everything in his power to silence you." "I know," she whispered, "but this isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us." As they parted ways, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on her. The night was colder than usual, the stars above barely visible through the thick, smoggy atmosphere of the colony. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was steel. There was no turning back now. Premier Nikolai Gregorov sat behind a massive desk in his office, the walls lined with screens displaying various parts of the colony. His face was hard as stone, his eyes narrowed as he watched the footage from the latest rally in Sector 3. Elena Vasquez, that name had become a thorn in his side, and he was done playing game. "She's gaining too much traction," he muttered, rubbing his temple. His advisors stood silently around him, afraid to speak unless addressed directly. "If she exposes the resource control system, it could ignite an uprising. We cannot allow that to happen." One of his top enforcers, Ivan Volkov, stepped forward, a hulking man with cold eyes and a reputation for brutality. Ivan was the regime, ice go-to man when things needed to be handled. "What would you like me to do, Premier?" Ivan asked, his voice low and menacing. Gregorov leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "It's time we remind the people who stand in charge. Disrupt her rallies, intimidate her supporters, and if she gets too close to the truth," his eyes darkened, "make sure she doesn't get a chance to speak." Ivan nodded once and turned to leave, a silent force of violence waiting to be unleashed. Over the next few days, the tension in the colony mounted. Elena's rallies became the target of sabotage. Her headquarters were vandalized, her volunteers threatened, and her speeches were mysteriously cut off mid-broadcast. Every time she tried to speak, the government found a way to silence her, but she refused to be cowed. On the day of her final rally, just 3 days before the election, Elena stood before her largest crowd yet. Thousands of people had gathered in the central square, their faces lit by the dim glow of the colony's sun-artificial lighting. Elena could feel the weight of their hope pressing down on her, and it terrified her, but it also gave her strength. "We are not slaves," she shouted, her voice echoing off the metal walls of the square. "We are not pawns in their game. We are human beings, and we have the right to breathe, to drink, to live, and we will not be silent." The crowd roared in response, their cheers shaking the very ground beneath her feet. But even as she spoke, she knew the danger was closing in. Ivan Volkov and his enforcers were watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Elena finished her speech, Sarchi approached her, his face pale and tense. "We need to get you out of here," he whispered. "There's word that Grigorov, Shenton are on their way. This rally is too big for them to ignore." Elena nodded, her heart pounding. "I wonder you let them scare me off." But even as she said it, she knew they had to be careful. She had seen what happened to those who crossed Grigorov. People disappeared, or worse, were found dead under mysterious circumstances. As the crowd began to disperse, Elena and Sargi slipped into the maze of alleys that twisted through the lower sectors, hoping to avoid detection. But they weren't too quick enough. A group of armed enforcers blocked their path, their faces hidden behind visors. At the head of the group stood Ivan Volkov, his lips curled into a cold, cruel smile. "Elena Vasquez," he said, his voice like gravel, "you've ever been causing quite a stir." Elena held her breath as Ivan Volkov stepped closer. The narrow alley walls seemed to close in, suffocating her with the reality of the danger she now faced. She could see the hard, brutal glint in his eyes, a man who had long abandoned any shred of conscience for power and control. Behind him, his enforcers stood ready, their weapons drawn, cutting off any hope of escape. "You have been very vocal," Ivan continued, his gravelly voice laced with malice. "But you should have known better. No one stands against the party and walks away unscathed." Sargi shifted beside her, his hand brushing against her arm, as if to signal he was ready to fight. But Elena knew that would be suicide. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with no way to overpower Grigorov's enforcers. She had to think fast. "I'm not afraid of you, Volkov," Elena said, her voice steady despite the thundering in her chest. "And neither are the people. They're waking up, they see the truth now, and no amount of violence will stop them." Volkov's smile widened, a predator toying with its prey. "You're naive if you think they care about your truth. Fear controls them, and fear will continue to control them long after you're gone." The words were like cold metal against her skin, but Elena did deep flint. "Maybe, but fear only works for so long. Eventually, it breaks, and when it does, you'll be the one running." Volkov's face hardened at the defiance in her voice. He nodded to one of the enforcers, who took a step forward, raising a baton. "Enough," Volkov growled. "Take her." Before the enforcer could reach her, a figure dropped from above a shadow in the dim light of the alley. The man landed silently, and with one swift motion, he disarmed the enforcer, sending him crashing into the wall. It was Sargi who took the opening, throwing his weight into another enforcer and knocking him off balance. The alley erupted into chaos. Elena barely had time to register what was happening before she felt someone grab her arm and pull her deeper into the maze of alley. It was the man who had appeared out of nowhere, his face obscured by a hood, moving with the grace and precision of someone well-versed in guerrilla tactics. Who, she started to ask, but he cut her off. "Keep moving, no time to explain." Sargi followed close behind, limping slightly from his earlier scuffle, but otherwise unharmed. The sounds of Volkov barking orders and the heavy footsteps of his enforcers echoed in the distance as they ran, but the labyrinth of alleys worked in their favor, providing cover. They rounded corner after corner, their path twisting deeper into the underbelly of the colony. Finally, the man led them into a hidden alcove behind an abandoned ventilation shaft, where they crouched low, listening for any signs of pursuit. The man pulled down his hood, revealing a weathered, rugged face. His sharp blue eyes flicked between Elena and Sargi, assessing them with quick efficiency. "You picked a hell of a time to stir the pot." "Who are you?" Elena asked, catching her breath. "I've been watching your campaign for weeks. Figured it was only a matter of time before Grigorov sends dogs. Why help us, Sargi asked, his voice filled with suspicion. Luca's eyes darkened. "Let's just say I've got no love for Grigorov's regime. The more people like you who push back, the better chance we all have." Elena studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his intention. Something about him felt off, but she couldn't afford to turn away help. Now, not when they were so close to exposing the truth. "What's your plan?" Luca asked, turning to Elena. She straightened her back, regaining her composure. "We have proof that Grigorov's been manipulating the election, controlling the flow of resources to force loyalty. I am going to release it during my final rally, right before the election results are announced. Once the people see the truth, they'll rise up." Luca's jaw tightened. "That's a dangerous gamble. You think the party's just gonna sit back and let that happen?" They wouldn't have a choice, Elena replied. Once the people see how deep the corruption goes, Gregorov wouldn't be able to contain the outrage. Sargi chimed in. We have the data. All we need is a secure way to broadcast it colony-wide. The party controls the media, but we've been working on an alternative. Luca leaned back, considering their words. I know a few backdoor channels. We could use the old cam towers from before the party stage takeover. They were off the grid now, but still functional. Elena nodded. That could work. How soon can we make it happen? Luca glanced at Sargi. With his technical expertise and a bit of luck, we could be ready by election night. Good, Elena said, her eyes blazing with determination. Then we move forward. No more waiting. We end it. Election night arrived, and the colony buzzed with nervous energy. The party had ramped up security, deploying armed enforcers throughout the streets, making it clear that dissent would not be tolerated. Gregorov stood at the center of it all, confident in his iron grip over the colony, certain that his victory was already sealed. But beneath the surface, something was shifting. Elena's words had struck a chord with the people, and even in the wealthier sectors, whispers of unrest could be heard. The resource shortages had pushed many to the edge, and now, for the first time, they were beginning to see the cracks in the party's own control. Elena, Sargi, and Luca moved quietly through the shadows, making their way to the old communication towers on the outskirts of the colony. The tension between them was palpable. Everything rested on this moment. One wrong move, and they would be silenced forever. At the base of the tower, Sardi set to work, connecting wires and inputting commands into a portable console. Luca kept watch, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any sign of enforcers. Elena stood beside Sargi, her heart pounding in her chest as the countdown began. Are we in? Elena asked, her voice low but urgent. Sargi nodded, his fingers flying over the console. Almost just a few more seconds. Suddenly, a blaring alarm echoed through the streets. Elena's heart skipped a beat. They had been found. Move faster, Luca hissed, drawing his weapon. Elena's pulse raced. Senor worked furiously, sweat dripping down his face. The sound of boots hitting the pavement grew louder, closer. She glanced at Luca, who had positioned himself at the entrance to the tower, ready to defend them with his life, if necessary. Then, just as the first enforcer rounded the corner, Sargi let out a breath of relief. Elena wasted no time. She stepped forward, grabbing the microphone connected to the comment system. Her voice broadcasted to the entire colony. People of Mars, she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. You've been lied to. The election is a sham, a tool used by the party to keep us under their control. But we have the proof. We have the truth. And tonight, we were taking it back. As her words echoed across the colony, Sargi uploaded the data files, showing the parties and manipulation of resources, their rigged voting systems, their crimes against the people. It was all laid bare for everyone to see. Elena continued, her voice rising in defiance. We are not slaves. We are not pawns in their game. We are human beings, and we will no longer be controlled by fear. Tonight, we rise. The response was immediate. Across the colony, people poured into the streets, their voices raised in anger and determination. The enforcers were overwhelmed, unable to contain the uprising. At the base of the tower, Elena stood tall, watching as the colony erupted into rebellion. This was what they had fought for. This was the beginning of the end for Gregorov's regime. But even as victory seemed within reach, Elena knew the fight was far from over. Gregorov would not go down without a final brutal confrontation, and when it came, she would be ready. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The crowd gathered in the square, their faces illuminated by the massive digital screens that broadcast the image of Chancellor Well, delivering yet another speech about unity, prosperity, and peace. Daniel Keenan stood on the outskirts, hands shoved into the pockets of his worn leather jacket, eyes fixed on the screen with a cold, analytical gaze. The speech, like so many before it, was filled with carefully crafted rhetoric, each word designed to instill loyalty in the hearts of the people. But Daniel had learned to see through the facade. He had spent the last few months running for public office, attempting to disrupt the seemingly unbreakable grip of the Communist Party on the nation. And yet, something was wrong. Every time he tried to challenge the party's version of events, the people would scoff or look at him as if he were mad. He would point out inconsistencies in historical records, only to be met with blank stares. Key figures in history that Daniel remembered clearly from his studies seemed to have vanished without a trace. It was as if the truth had been rewritten. As the Chancellor sent image flickered off the screen, the crowd dispersed, each person moving, as if on autopilot, heading back to their neatly controlled lives. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. His campaign was gaining momentum, but he knew the time was running out. If he didn't uncover the truth soon, all his efforts would be for nothing. Just as he was about to turn away, a figure approached him from the shadow. Daniel tensed, instinctively stepping back, his eyes scanning the stranger. It was a woman, slender and tall, dressed in a plain gray coat that blended seamlessly with the city's cold, utilitarian backdrop. Her face was partially hidden by the hood, but there was something about her that seemed familiar. "You're Daniel Qin," she said, her voice low but urgent. He hesitated. "Who's asking?" The woman glanced over her shoulder as if ensuring they weren't being watched. "I don't really have much time. I know what you were trying to do. Expose the party, reveal the truth. You were not going to find it through the usual means. They've covered their tracks too well." Daniel's interest piqued, though his caution remained. "And you would know this because I used to work for them," she replied, pulling back her hood to reveal her face. Her sharp features were pale under the artificial light, her black eyes glinting with intensity. "Scifiaudiobooks, I was a scientist in the time manipulation department. I know what they've done, what they were still doing." Daniel's breath caught. Time manipulation. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, and yet there was a sense of undeniable truth in her words. The discrepancies he'd noticed in history, the way people seemed to forget events or even entire individuals, it all started to make a terrible kind of sense. "I don't believe you," Daniel said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "Time manipulation, you were saying. The party is rewriting history." Sophia stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They suggest rewriting history. They re-altering people's memories, erasing anyone who poses a threat to their control. They've been doing it for decades. That's why you can find any real evidence against them, because it no longer exists." For a moment, Daniel felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Could this really be true? Could the party have such complete control over reality itself? But he'd seen the signs, memories that didn't match records, people who recalled events differently, as if history itself were fluid. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, his voice hardening. "How do I know you're not working for them, trying to set me up?" Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line, and she pulled a small device from her coat pocket, holding it up to him. It was a sleek silver object no larger than a smartphone with a glowing blue core at its center. "This is a temporal disruptor," she said. "It can temporarily shield you from the time manipulations, allowing you to see the truth for yourself. But it only lasts for a short while. Once the effect wears off, you'll be susceptible to their control again." Daniel stared at the device, his mind racing. If what she said was true, this could be the key to exposing the party's lie. But it was also a dangerous gamble. If he was caught using it, the consequences would be dire. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, narrowing his eye. Sophia looked away, her expression hardening. "Because I can't stand by and watch them manipulate reality anymore. I was part of it once, but I didn't realize how far they were willing to go. People have a right to know the truth, and you were the only one with enough influence to make that happen." Daniel hesitated for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he reached out and took the device from her hand. "If you're lying to me, I'll make sure you regret it," he warned. Sophia nodded solemnly. "I am not lying, but be careful once you use that. They'll know you were coming for that." With that, she disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Daniel alone with the weight of her revelations pressing down on him. That night, Daniel sat in his small apartment, staring at the temporal disruptor on the table in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Could this really be the answer? Could the party have such control over time and memory? He had always known the government was corrupt, but this was something else entirely, something far more sinister. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the device, his fingers trembling slightly. If this worked, if what Sophia said was true, then he would finally have the proof he needed to expose the party's lie. But it would also make him a target. He knew that once he crossed this line, there would be no going back. With a final glance at the blank walls of his apartment, Daniel activated the device. A soft hum filled the air, and for a moment nothing seemed to happen. Then suddenly, the world around him shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and for the first time he saw the truth. His mind flooded with memories, real memories, not the altered ones the party had implanted. He remembered events that had been erased from history, people who had been wiped from existence. He saw the true face of the Communist Party's regime, the brutality and deception that had kept them in power for so long. It was overwhelming, and for a moment, Daniel felt as though he might collapse under the weight of it all. But then something else stirred within him, a burning determination, a need to set things right. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help, people he could trust. People who had also been affected by the party's manipulation. But finding them would be risky. The party's surveillance network was extensive, and they would be watching him closely. Still, Daniel knew he had no choice. If he didn't act now, the truth would be lost forever, buried beneath layers of lies and altered memory. The next morning, Daniel contacted Sophia, arranging to meet her in a secluded part of the city, far from the prying eyes of the party. When they met, her face was tense, her eyes scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. "You used it, didn't you?" she asked quietly, glancing at the disruptor in his hand. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. "You were right, them been rewriting everything, history, memory, even people." Sophia exhaled, a look of relief crossing her face. "I knew you'd see it. But this is just the beginning, Daniel. If we were going to expose them, we need hard evidence, something that the public can ignore." "And how do we get that?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia hesitated for a moment before speaking. There's a facility, one of the central hubs where they control the time manipulation. It's heavily guarded, but if we can get in, we can access the mainframe and download the proof we need. It's the only way. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Breaking into a government facility was a dangerous proposition. If they were caught, there would be no trial, no mercy. The party would make sure they disappeared, just like all the others who had tried to stand against them. But he knew there was no other option. If they didn't take this chance, the truth would remain hidden forever. "I am in," he said, finally, his voice steady, "but we are going to need help." Daniel and Sophia moved quickly. They didn't have time to waste, and they knew every second counted. As they slipped through the crowded streets, Daniel's mind raced with possibility. They needed allies, people who could be trusted to help them infiltrate the facility without tipping off the party's agent. He thought of the dissidents he had encountered during his campaign, individuals who had grown tired of the party's lies, those who had noticed the cracks in the narrative but lacked the power to challenge it openly. Now, with the truth in his hands, Daniel had something that could unite them. He led Sophia through a maze of back alleys, finally stopping in front of a nondescript building. The air smelled of grease and smoke from the nearby food vendors, and the sound of machinery droned in the background. This was where he would find Lismine, a former journalist who had been forced into hiding after publishing an expose on government corruption. Daniel had helped her disappear months ago, and now he needed her expertise. Inside, the dimly lit room felt stifling. The space was cluttered with discarded electronics, scattered notes, and walls covered in maps and articles pinned in no particular order. Leimana looked up from her seat, her eyes narrowing when she saw Daniel enter with Sophia close behind. "You've got trouble with you, haven't you?" Leimana said, her tone sharp, but not without a hint of amusement. "You always do." "Good to see you too," Daniel replied, forcing a smile. "We need your help this time. It's big." Leidman crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Big how? Because if you were talking about your usual government speeches, I am not interested." Sophia stepped forward, pulling a small data chip from her pocket. "We were talking about proof that the party has been manipulating time-altering history and memory to control the public." Lehrman's expression shifted, the skepticism fading. She gestured for Sophia to hand over the chip, then quickly inserted it into the terminal on her desk. Her eyes darted across the screen as lines of data scrolled in front of her. "It's true," Daniel said quietly. "I used the device. I've seen the real history. They've erased people, rewritten events. They've built their entire regime on a lie." For a long moment, Lemon said nothing. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on the desk, her mind working through the enormity of what she was seeing. Finally, she looked up, her face set with determination. "If this is true, and I am starting to believe it is, then we're in more danger than I thought. They've perfected it. It's why no one remembers anything differently. Why dissent is so easily snuffed out." "That's us why we need you," Daniel said. We're going after the central facility where they control the time manipulation. If we can get in, we can expose them, and they won't be able to hide anymore. Li Mind stared at him for a moment, her jaw tight. You know what you're asking me to do, right? This isn't she just publishing some underground article. This is going to get us killed. I know, Daniel replied, his voice steady, but if we don't, do this, nothing will ever change. Lamine exhaled sharply, running a hand through her short hair. All right, I am in, but we were going to need more than just the three of us. A few hours later, they had assembled a small group of trusted allies in a secluded warehouse. The air inside was thick with tension, the kind that comes when people know they are on the edge of something that could change the world or destroy them in the process. The plan was simple, but execution would be anything but they needed to disable the surveillance systems long enough to infiltrate the facility, access the mainframe, and download the evidence of the party time manipulation. Sophia had drawn up a schematic of the building based on her knowledge from her time working in the time manipulation department, marking the key locations they would need to breach. There's a back entrance, she explained, pointing to the map. It's less heavily guarded, but the real challenge is inside. The time manipulation control room is deep underground, and the only way to access it is through the elevator in the main corridor. We'll need to move fast once we reach it. Daniel studied the map, committing it to memory. Every step of the plan was dangerous, but there was no room for error. The party's forces would be on them the moment they were detected. Once we read inside there's no turning back, Daniel said, looking at each of the faces in the room. If anyone wants out, now send the time. No one moved. The resolve in the room was palpable. The night of the infiltration arrived, and the city was shrouded in darkness, its towering buildings looming like silent sentinels. Daniel and his team moved under the cover of night, keeping to the shadows as they approached the facility. The cold air stung Daniel's face, but his mind was focused, his senses heightened. Sophia led them to the back entrance, her fingers dancing over the control panel as she bypassed the security system. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they slipped inside. The interior of the facility was eerily quiet, the sterile hallways bathed in the dim glow of emergency light. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as they moved through the corridors, each step bringing them closer to their goal and to danger. When they reached the elevator, Daniel signaled for the team to hold their position. Lizman hacked into the system, jamming the security feeds long enough for them to enter the elevator without triggering any alarm. The doors closed behind them, and Daniel felt the familiar drop in his stomach as the elevator descended into the depths of the facility. As the doors slid open, they were greeted by the sight of the time manipulation control room, a vast cavernous space filled with machines humming with energy. At the center of the room stood the mainframe, a massive pulsating structure that controlled the flow of time and memory for the entire nation. "We need to move," Sophia whispered, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of security. "I'll access the mainframe. You keep watch." Daniel nodded, positioning himself by the entrance with the others. Every second felt like an eternity as Sophia worked, her fingers flying over the control. The sound of her typing echoed in the silence, each keystroke a reminder of how close they were to either success or failure. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the room slid open, and a group of armed guards stormed in. Daniel's breath caught as he raised his weapon, his mind racing. They had been found. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Daniel ducked behind a console, returning fire as his team scattered, engaging the guards in a desperate attempt to hold them off. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces, and the room filled with smoke and chaos. In the midst of the battle, Daniel caught sight of Sophia still working furiously at the mainframe. "Ivy almost got it," she shouted over the noise, but the guards were closing in, and Daniel knew they were running out of time. He fired off another round, his heart hammering in his chest. They couldn't hold them off much longer. Just as the guards began to overwhelm them, the room was filled with a sudden, blinding light. For a moment, everything went silent, the world frozen in place. When the light faded, the guards stood still, their weapons lowered, their expressions blank. Daniel blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. He turned to Sophia, who was standing by the mainframe, a look of triumph on her face. "I did it," she said breathlessly. "I accessed the time manipulation system. We were in control now. For a moment, Daniel felt a surge of relief. They had done it. They had the proof they needed to expose the party's lies, to show the world the truth about what had been happening for so long. But as the reality of their victory set in, so did the enormity of what lay ahead. They had the evidence, but now they had to make sure it reached the public, and the party would stop at nothing to prevent that. "We need to go," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "They'll send reinforcements. We don't have much time." Sophia nodded, grabbing the data chip from the mainframe and pocketing it. Together, they rushed back to the elevator, the team following close behind. The facility was already on high alert, alarms blaring as they made their escape. As they emerged into the night, Daniel felt the weight of what they had just accomplished pressing down on him. They had the truth, but the battle was far from over. The party would come for them with everything they had, and now it was a race against time, literally. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The hot, sticky air clung to Ed Green's skin as he stood on the wooden platform, facing a small crowd of loyal supporters. They had gathered in a remote part of the city, far from the eyes of government agents, in a place where the people still had hope. His heart pounded, but it wasn't true nerves, it was determination. The wind carried the scent of decay from the nearby fields, once lush and fertile, now wasteland poisoned by government-run factories. Ida knew the truth, but it wasn't true enough to know it. He had to expose it. "I stand before you today, not as a politician, but as one of you, a citizen, who refuses to watch. As our land is destroyed, our people silenced." Aden began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. The faces in the crowd reflected the quiet desperation of a population too long oppressed. "The so-called elections coming up are nothing but a facade. Minister Zongkang and the Communist Party have tightened their grip on this nation, and every vote is another link in the chain they've all wrapped around us." A few murmurs rose from the audience. The truth wasn't easy to hear, but Aden could feel their frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. He locked eyes with Sophia Zahu, standing at the edge of the gathering, her camera capturing every moment. She gave him a subtle nod. It was time to push forward. "I've been digging deeper, and what we've found is worse than we imagined. The party is not just ignoring the environmental crisis, they're re-accelerating it. They're intentionally driving our resources into the ground, controlling the population through fear and environmental collapse. And if we don't do it now, they will take everything." A hush fell over the crowd. Aiden paused, his chest heaving with the enormity of what he was saying. He glanced again at Sophia. She was ready. They'd been working in secret for months, investigating the dark underbelly of the regime, risking their lives at every turn. And now, with the election just weeks away, they were about to make their findings public. The stakes couldn't be higher. After the rally, Sophia joined Aiden as they made their way to the small car parked discreetly behind a row of trees. Her short, black hair fluttered in the breeze, her eyes sharp and focused. "The party won't let this go unnoticed," she said quietly, glancing around as they walked. "We were going to need more than a speech to bring them down." Aiden nodded. "I know, but the people need to understand what's happening. We can just keep this in the shadows. They need to see the evidence, and we need to get it to them before the party shuts us down." They drove through the crumbling outskirts of the city in silence, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The landscape was a testament to the party's corruption. Factories belched toxic fumes into the sky, fields lay fallow, their soil poisoned beyond repair. Entire communities had been uprooted, displaced by the party's silent, relentless pursuit of control. It was hard to believe that just a few decades ago, this country had been a beacon of hope for progress and prosperity. As they approached the safe house, a down-assess phone buzzed a message from Isaac Lin, the whistleblower. It was short and cryptic. "Tomorrow, midnight. Same place." Aiden showed Sophia the screen. "It's happening." Sophia exhaled slowly. "Isaac is risking everything to get us this information. We can't fail him." Isaac Lane had once been a rising star within the Communist Party's Department of Population Control, but his conscience had gotten the better of him. He'd have seen too much, and now he was their key to exposing the party's darkest secret. But every meeting with Isaac was fraught with danger. If the government found out what he was doing, it would mean certain death, not just for him, but for all of them. The next night, Aiden and Sophia made their way to the meeting point, a derelict factory on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with tension as they waited in the shadows. The only sound the distant hum of machinery. Finally, Isaac emerged from the darkness, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes darting nervously. "You weren't," he followed, he asked, his voice low. "No," Aiden replied. "Did you get it?" Isaac nodded, pulling a small data chip from his coat pocket. "Everything, the environmental destruction, the population control programs, the fake election. It's all here, but there's sense more. The party isn't just destroying the environment for profit. They were doing it to control the population. They want to create a crisis so severe that the people have no choice but to rely on them for survival." Aiden felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. They were manufacturing a disaster. Isaac nodded grimly, and they were close to finishing it. If they succeed, there will be no way out. They'll have total control. Sophia took the chip, her face set in determination. "We need to get this out to the people now." But as they turned to leave, a sudden noise stopped them in their track. The sharp click of a gun being cocked echoed through the dark factory. Aiden's heart raced as he spun around, his eyes searching the shadows. 4 figures stepped into the dim light, armed and dressed in the unmistakable uniforms of the party, secret police. "You're under arrest," one of the officers growled, his voice cold and devoid of emotion, "for crimes against the state." Time seemed to slow as Aiden's solid mind raced. There was no way out. They were trapped, but they couldn't let the party get their hands on that data chip. It was their only chance to expose the truth. Without thinking, Aiden lunged at the nearest officer, grabbing for his gun. The 2 men grappled in the darkness, the sound of grunts and scuffling filling the air. Sophia and Isaac ducked behind a nearby crate, desperately trying to stay out of the line of fire. A shot rang out, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Aiden thought it was over. But the officer's aim had been off, and Aiden managed to wrestle the gun from his hands, delivering a hard punch to the man's jaw. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious. "Run," Aiden shouted to Sophia and Isaac as he turned to face the other officer. They bolted for the door, the sound of gunfire ringing in their ears as they fled into the night. Aiden's breath came in ragged gasps as they ran, his mind racing with fear and adrenaline. They had the evidence, but now the party knew they were close, and they wouldn't stop until they were dead. By the time they reached the safe house, Aiden's entire body ached from the fight, but they had made it for now. They were safe. Sophia wasted no time. She plugged the data chip into her laptop and began the process of uploading the files to a secure network. "This has to go public now," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, "before the party can stop us." But even as the files began to upload, Aiden knew that their battle was far from over. They had the truth, but they were fighting a machine that had been built to suppress it, and now they were in its crosshairs. "We need to move fast," Aiden said, pacing the room. "They'll be coming for us." Sophia nodded, her expression grim. "We need to get this out before they can silence us." But as the minutes ticked by, a deep sense of unease settled over Aiden. The truth was out there now, but would it be enough? Would the people rise up, or would the party's iron grip tighten even further? As the first rays of dawn began to break through the window, Aiden knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and the fight for freedom had only just begun. Aiden barely had time to catch his breath as the sun rose, casting a pale light over the safe house. The weight of what they had done hung in the air, like the morning mist. Sophia was still bent over her laptop, her face lit by the glow of the screen. The files were being transmitted, but they both knew the party's sun reach was long, and it wouldn't be long before their enemies found them again. "We need to get out of here," Aiden said, his voice tight with urgency. His body was still humming with adrenaline, every muscle tensed as if expecting the door to burst open at any moment. Sophia did look up, but she nodded. "Just a few more minutes. We have to make sure the files are fully uploaded if anything happens." The door creaked open, and Aiden's heart skipped a beat, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun they had taken from the officer the night before. But it was only Isaac, looking pale and shaken, his eyes darting around the room like a hunted animal. "They were coming," Isaac said breathlessly. "I saw them on my way back. They were sweeping the area. We don't have much time." Aiden swore under his breath. "Sophia, we need to go now." She finally looked up, her expression grim. "It's soon done," she said, slamming the laptop shut. "But they were going to come after everyone who sees this. The public isn't ready for this kind of truth. It's going to shake the foundation of everything they believe." And Ida knew she was right. The evidence they had uncovered wasn't just damning, it was earth-shattering. The party's end, carefully constructed image would crumble, and with it the trust of millions of people. But it would also make them the most wanted people in the country. We need to split up, Aiden said, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. They'll expect us to stay together. If we separate it, it'll be harder for them to track all of us. Isaac looked terrified at the suggestion, but he nodded. What about you two? What's your plan? Ida met Sophia so gaze. They had been partners in this fight for so long that words were almost unnecessary. They both knew the risks, knew that there might not be a way out this time, but there was no turning back. We'll head to the coast, Eden said after a beat. There's some resistance cell near the old dock. They can get us out of the city, maybe even the country, if we were lucky. Sophia stood, her face set with determination. Let's move. They gathered what little they had, shoving laptops, hard drives, and weapons into bags. Isaac hesitated by the door, his hand shaking as he gripped the knob. If they catch me, they won, Aiden said firmly. You've done more than enough, Isaac. You gave us the truth now. It's up to us to make sure it gets out. Isaac gave a short, tense nod and slipped out into the early morning light. Aiden and Sophia followed moments later, moving quickly and quietly through the back alleys, keeping to the shadows. Every sound made Aiden, as pulse quickened, every footstep feeling like the approach of death. The party. Secret police were everywhere, and the city was their hunting ground. The sun was fully up by the time they reached the edge of the industrial district. The old docks lay ahead, a sprawling complex of rusting cranes and crumbling warehouses that had been abandoned years ago when the government shifted focus to automated production. The resistance used it as a base, hidden in plain sight. Aiden's stomach churned as they approached the main gate. He had expected to feel some relief upon reaching the docks, but instead there was only a gnawing sense of unease. Something wasn't right. Wait, Sophia said. Stopping abruptly, she crouched down behind a stack of shipping containers, pulling Aiden down with her. Look. Aiden followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. The docks were crawling with soldiers, all in the unmistakable uniform of the party. Secret police. They moved in tight formations, sweeping the area with military precision. The resistance had been compromised. Sophia cursed under her breath. They knew we were coming. We've walked right into a trap. We need to find another way. Aiden whispered. His mind raced as he scanned the area for any possible escape route. There was no way they could take on that many soldiers, and if the resistance was gone, their last chance of getting out of the city had vanished with it. Before he could say anything more, a loud crack echoed through the air. Aiden whipped around just in time to see a bullet ricochet off the metal container beside them. They were under fire. Run, Sophia shouted, grabbing Aiden's arm and pulling him toward a narrow alley between two warehouses. Bullets whizzed past them as they sprinted, the sound of boots pounding against concrete growing louder behind them. They burst into the alley, panting and gasping for breath, but there was no time to stop. The soldiers were gaining on them, and the city's labyrinth of alleys and abandoned buildings was their only hope of losing them. Aiden's lungs burned as they ran, his legs aching with the effort. He could hear Sophia struggling beside him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They were both running on empty, but there was no other option. Stopping meant death. They rounded a corner, and suddenly the world seemed to tilt beneath Aiden's feet. A wave of dizziness hit him like a freight train, and he stumbled, his vision blurring. He tried to keep moving, but his body refused to cooperate. He collapsed against a wall, gasping for air, his chest heaving. Sophia skidded to a stop beside him, her face pale with exhaustion. Come on, Aiden, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. We can stop now. But Aiden couldn't move. His body had reached its limit, and all he could do was sit there, his back pressed against the cold brick wall, as the sound of approaching footsteps grew closer. I am sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with regret. I can't. But before he could finish, the footsteps stopped. A moment of eerie silence hung in the air, and then the sound of a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the alley. Well, a voice said, dripping with amusement. I have to admit, I am impressed you've caused quite a bit of trouble for us. Aiden looked up, his heart sinking as he saw the figures standing at the mouth of the alley ministers of air. The man's face was as cold and emotionless as ever, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his eye. He took a few steps forward, his polished boots clicking against the pavement, his hands clasped behind his back. I must commend your efforts, Zhang said, his voice smooth and calculating. You've been a thorn in our side for quite some time, but all good things must come to an end. Sophia stepped in front of Aiden, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with defiance. You can kill us, she said, her voice shaking, but you can't kill the truth. The Sang raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Of the truth, he laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You're still clinging to that, are you? The truth is irrelevant, my dear. The people believe what I tell them to believe, and as for your little rebellion, well, let's just say it will be dealt with swiftly. Aiden tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He was helpless, watching as Zoran says. Soldiers closed in around them, their guns trained on his chest. This was the end. But just as Orang opened his mouth to deliver the final blow, a deafening explosion rocked the alley. The ground shook beneath them, and the air filled with the sound of shattering glass and collapsing metal. Before he could finish, a second explosion ripped through the docks, sending debris flying in all directions. Aiden could barely hear over the roar of destruction, but he saw the soldiers scatter, their formation breaking in the chaos. In the confusion, Sophia grabbed Aiden's arm and pulled him to his feet. Now's our chance, she shouted over the noise. Come on. They stumbled through the smoke and debris, half blinded by the dust and flames, but they kept moving. The explosions had bought them time, but Aiden knew it wouldn't last. They had to get out of the city now. As they made their way through the burning wreckage of the docks, Aiden's thoughts raced. The resistance wasn't all dead. They had struck back, and they had saved them, but for how long? The truth was out, but the fight was far from over. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Marcus Keller stood on the balcony of his sleek high-rise apartment, looking out over the glittering city below. The lights of the sprawling metropolis twinkled like stars, a technological wonder that masked the rot within. He had worked his entire life to reach this moment, to be on the verge of becoming a political candidate for the upcoming election. Yet tonight, there was a heaviness in his chest that wouldn't go away. Elena, the thought of her gnawed at him. It had been weeks since anyone had heard from her, and that in itself was unusual. Elena Ford was his closest friend, a woman who had always been loud, brash, and fiercely dedicated to fighting the regime. Now she had vanished. All traces of her existence had disappeared from social media, public records, even family photos. When he tried to find any mention of her in the city's official archives, it was as if she had never existed. She just disappeared. She had been erased. Marcus turned away from the cityscape and stepped inside. The walls of his apartment were bare, the only personal touches being a few scattered data pads on the glass table and a half-finished cup of coffee. He paced the room, replaying the conversations he'd had with other activists. Most were too afraid to ask questions. They whispered rumors of people being disappeared, buried by the government, never to be seen again. But Marcus had to know more. Elena wasn't just another victim. She was his link to something greater, something dangerous. And now he feared she had been taken because of their work together. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass of the window, his face illuminated by the city light. A man in his early 30s with sharp features, dark hair, and eyes that had seen too much in too little time. He had to make a decision, one that would take him down a path of no return. Marcus grabbed his jacket and slipped out of the apartment, heading into the depths of the city. The underground club was packed. The thrum of bass reverberated through the walls, masking any conversations that might catch the wrong ear. This was where resistance members met, a safe haven beneath the government's all-seeing eye. The smoky haze in the air made it difficult to see anyone clearly, but Marcus knew who he was looking for. A man with a scar running across his left eye sat in a booth at the back of the club, surrounded by a few familiar faces from the resistance. His name was Jax, a tech genius who had worked for the government, SARD's surveillance department. Before defecting, if anyone knew what had happened to Elena, it was him. Jax looked up as Marcus approached, giving a slight nod. Sure, you've been asking too many questions, he said, voice low. Sorry, that's how people get erased. I'm not here to talk about me, and Marcus replied, sliding into the booth. Pierre, I need to know what happened to Elena. Jack's eyes flickered. With unease, he leaned in, lowering his voice even further. She's not dead, if that's not what you were thinking, but she might as well be told. Marcus says, Heart skipped a beat. The government has a program, Jax continued, something they don't advertise, obviously. Until kill dissidents anymore. It's too messy, too obvious. Instead, they erase them, wipe their records, their identities, everything. And they lock them up in secret prisons. That way it sounded like they never existed. No body, no funeral, no trail to follow. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. Harry, where are these prisons? Jax shook his head. That's the thing. I don't know. It's signing off. But I've heard whispers people like Elena, they were not dead. They were just gone tucked away where no one will ever find them. How do we find her? Marcus Sal's voice was sharp, urgent. Jax leaned back, eyeing Marcus warily. See, you don't, no one in that ever come back from being erased. Not that anyone saw die. Rifian, trying calm, Marcus said firmly. A long silence followed as Jax studied him. Finally, the tech expert sighed and pulled out a small data chip from his jacket pocket. This is the only lead I've got. It's not much, but it's as a start. It's also a fragment of code from the government system, something I intercepted before I left. I think it's us connected to the erasure program, but I haven't been able to crack it. You might have better luck. Marcus took the chip, his mind racing. This was it, a chance to get inside, to find out where they had taken Alina and the others. He rose to leave, but Jax grabbed his arm. Be careful, and Yates warned, his voice heavy with meaning. Once you start down this road, there's no coming back. Back at his apartment, Marcus plugged the data chip into his terminal, his hands shaking with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. The screen flashed to life, displaying lines of code, encrypted and unreadable to the untrained eye. But Marcus wasn't trying untrained. He had spent years working in tech before diving into politics. And if there was one thing he could do, it was break into system. Hours passed as he worked decoding the fragmented data. His mind buzzed with the enormity of what he was trying to uncover. The government says power was absolute. They controlled every aspect of life, from the food people ate to the thoughts they were allowed to think. And now they were erasing people, wiping them from existence without a trace. Finally, the code began to unravel. Hidden within the layers of encryption, Marcus found the name of a facility, a place on the outskirts of the city, listed only by a string of numbers. It wasn't too much, but it was enough. A prison disguised as a government research center. He sat back in his chair, the weight of what he had discovered settling over him. Elena was alive, somewhere inside that facility, along with countless others who had been erased, and now he had a way to reach her. But it wouldn't be easy. The facility was heavily guarded, its location secret for a reason. Marcus knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, and he knew just where to find it. The warehouse on the edge of the city was dark, the only light coming from a few dim bulbs hanging from the ceiling. This was where the resistance operated, from a place where the disillusioned and the desperate gathered to plan their rebellion against the regime. Marcus entered the building, his presence drawing the attention of a few armed guards. One of them, a woman with short cropped hair and a steely expression, stepped forward. Righty Rakeller, right? A politician. I'm not here as a politician, Marcus said. I am here because I need your help. The woman smirked, crossing her arms. Help with what? Running another campaign? We were not in the business of elections down here. I need to break into a government facility, Marcus said, his voice steady. A prison. They've taken my friends, my family. I have proof. Her smirk faded, replaced by a look of intrigue. Fireproof truth. Marcus held up the data chip. It's sent all here. Because I'll here program the secret prison. They were wiping people from existence, and I know where one of the prisons is. The woman studied him for a moment before nodding. I come with me. She led him to a room at the back of the warehouse, where a group of resistance members were gathered around a table covered in blueprints and surveillance photos. At the head of the table sat a man with graying hair and sharp eyes, Vince, the leader of the resistance. Marcus laid the data chip on the table. I have information on a facility where the government is holding erased people. I need your help to break in. Vince glanced at the chip, then back at Marcus. And why should we trust you? You're part of the system, Keller. You've spent your life working within it. Not anymore, Marcus replied. Ye not after what they've done to the people I care about. Vince stared at him for a long moment before nodding. We'll help you, but this isn't going to be easy. That facility is guarded by some of the best security the regime has to offer. If we were going in, we need to be prepared. The plan was set in motion quickly. The resistance had been gathering information on government facilities for years, and Marcus Silad was the missing piece they needed. The facility was located in an isolated part of the city disguised as a research center. It was surrounded by layers of security cameras, guards, and encrypted access points, but the resistance had ways of getting around those obstacles. Marcus spent the night preparing, his mind focused on what was to come. This was no longer just about exposing the regime, it was personal. Alina was alive, and he would do whatever it took to get her back. But even as he prepared, doubt gnawed at the edges of his thought. What if they were too late? What if Alina and the others were already lost, broken by the system that had erased them? There was no room for hesitation now. Tomorrow they would strike. The morning arrived with a thick fog rolling over the city, shrouding everything in a pale gray. It was the perfect cover for what they were about to do. Marcus met the resistance members outside the warehouse, the tension in the air palpable. Armed with the blueprints Vince had provided, they prepared to breach the facility. Each of them wore tactical gear designed to avoid detection by the security systems, and they moved with quiet precision, their faces set with grim determination. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. The facility loomed ahead, a nondescript building surrounded by high fences and security towers. It looked like any other government structure, its bland exterior hiding the horrors within. Marcus' thoughts kept drifting to Alina. Was she inside right now, locked away in some dark cell? Would she even recognize him after all this time? He pushed the doubts aside. There was no room for hesitation. Vince motioned to the others, signaling them to fan out. The resistance members moved quickly, disabling the external security systems with expert precision. The plan was to avoid direct confrontation for as long as possible. They needed to get inside, retrieve the data on the erased prisoners, and find Alina. If they were caught too early, they wouldn't stand a chance. Marcus followed closely behind Vince and the others as they approached the perimeter fence. The security cameras had been neutralized, and they cut through the fence with laser cutters, slipping through the gap silently. The cold morning air stung Marcus's face, but he ignored it, his focus razor sharp. They reached the side of the building, moving to the maintenance door. Vince held up a small device, overriding the electronic lock. With a soft click, the door swung open, and they slipped inside. The interior of the facility was sterile, clinical, with white walls and harsh fluorescent light. It felt more like a hospital than a prison, but Marcus knew better. They moved through the corridors, keeping low and avoiding the few security guards they encountered. Vince's intel had been good. The facility was lightly staffed, its true nature hidden even from most government workers. They reached a central control room, where they could access the prison internal system. Vince motioned for Marcus to follow him inside, while the others stood guard outside. The room was filled with monitors displaying security feeds and rows of terminals. Vince sat down at one of the terminals, quickly typing commands into the system. This should give us access to the prisoner database, Vince ordered, his eyes scanning the screen. Marcus stood over his shoulder, watching as lines of code scrolled across the terminal. His hands were shaking, his mind racing. This was it. If they found Alina sane in the system, they could find where she was being held. This, Vince said, pointing to the screen, weary in. Marcus leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. A list of names appeared on the screen, each one marked with a status code. Most were labeled erased people who had been wiped from public records and sent to this facility. Marcus's heart pounded as he scrolled through the list, searching for the name he feared and hoped to see. Then he found it. Alina Ford, status erased. Location, cell block. She's right here, Marcus whispered, his voice tight with emotion. Vince nodded. We've got her location now. We just have to get her out. They downloaded the list of names onto a data chip, securing the evidence they needed to expose the government Sci-Fi program. But Marcus' mind was focused on one thing: getting to Alina. They moved swiftly through the facility, heading for cell block. The corridors grew darker as they descended into the lower levels of the building, the sterile white walls replaced by cold concrete. The atmosphere shifted, becoming oppressive, suffocating. This was where the erased were kept, locked away from the world above. As they approached the cell block, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Marcus froze, signaling to Vince and the others. A pair of guards appeared around the corner. their eyes scanning the hallway. There was no time to hide before the guards could react. Vince and one of the resistance members leapt forward, taking them down silently. The guards crumpled to the ground unconscious. "Let's move," Vince whispered, motioning them forward. They reached the door to cell block B, and Marcus's stomach churned with anticipation. Vince bypassed the lock and the door slid open with a hit. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of damp concrete and despair. The cells lined the walls, each one holding a prisoner who had been erased from existence. Men and women sat in silence, their eyes hollow, their spirits broken. Marcus's eyes scanned the cells, searching for her. Then in the far corner, he saw her. Elena. She sat in the back of the cell, her head down, her dark hair tangled and unkempt. She looked smaller than he remembered, thinner, worn down by months of captivity. Marcus's heart ached as he stepped forward, gripping the bars of her cell. Elena, he whispered. She didn't move at first, then slowly she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, there was no recognition in her gaze, as if the person she had been had faded away, but then slowly, a spark of life flickered in her eye. Marcus, her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "It's me," said his voice thick with emotion. "Dear, I am here to get you out." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry instead. She rose to her feet, her movements slow and shaky. Marcus felt a surge of relief as he watched her, knowing that despite everything she was still alive, still fighting. Vince quickly unlocked the cell door and Marcus stepped inside, pulling Elena into his arms. She felt fragile, like she might break at any moment, but she clung to him, holding on, as if her life depended on it. "We need to move," Vince said, his voice cutting through the moment. "And now..." Marcus nodded, pulling Elena with him as they hurried back toward the exit. The resistance members covered their retreat, taking down any guards they encountered. Alarms began to blare throughout the facility, the sound reverberating off the concrete walls. Their cover was blown. They burst out into the open air, the fog still clinging to the city like a blanket. Resistance vehicles waited nearby, their engines idling. Marcus helped Elena into one of the vehicles as the others piled in. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared to life, speeding away from the facility. As they drove through the empty streets, Marcus sat next to Elena, his hand gripping hers tightly. She was safe for now, but the fight was far from over. The data chip they had stolen was more than just a list of names. It was a smoking gun, evidence that the government had been systematically erasing its opposition and imprisoning them in secret facilities. Marcus knew that with this information, they could blow the lid off the entire erasure program, but that also meant they would become the government's top target. They regrouped at the warehouse, where Vince began analyzing the data. The resistance was already working on a plan to leak the information to the public, but it wouldn't truly be easy. The government controlled the media, the networks, everything. They needed to find a way to get the truth out, to show the world what was really happening. Elena sat beside Marcus, silent but alert. Her strength was returning, but he could see the toll her captivity had taken on her. There was a hardness in her now, a sharp edge that hadn't already been there before. She had been through hell, and though she was free, she wasn't the same person she had been. "They'll come after us," Elena said quietly, her voice low. "I know," Marcus replied, "but we can talk." "Stop. No, this is bigger than us." She nodded, her eyes dark and focused. "We expose them. We bring them down, no matter what it takes." The days that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. The resistance worked tirelessly, coordinating with underground networks and trusted contacts to ensure that when the data was leaked, it would reach every corner of society. The government's grip on the people was strong, but if they could show the world the truth, they could spark a revolution. As the day of the leak approached, Marcus and Elena found themselves standing on the balcony of his apartment, once again looking out over the city. The lights below seemed brighter now, more vivid, as if the world was holding its breath. "Were we really doing this?" Elena said on lace soft. "We are," Marcus replied, "and once the truth is out there, there's no going back." She smiled faintly, a flicker of the old Elena shining through. "Real good. I don't want to go back." They stood there in silence, watching the city, knowing that everything was about to change. The regime had kept them in the dark for too long, erasing those who dared to stand up. But now the light was about to shine through, and the world would see the truth. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Dr. Ethan Marks had always prided himself on his sharp, rational mind. For years, he had poured his energy into neural research, delving into the mysteries of human thought, emotions, and behavior. But as he sat alone in his dimly lit office at the research facility, a chill crept down his spine that he hadn't felt in years. What he had stumbled upon was not a breakthrough in medical science or mental health. It was a horror beyond imagination. His hand hovered over the encrypted folder on his computer, the one marked with the government seal. For days, he had been tracking irregularities in the files he was permitted to access. Something felt wrong, and now with a final click, the last of the hidden files opened up before him. The contents of the documents were sickeningly clear. The Communist Party had developed a new form of chemical compound, one that could alter human emotions, stripping away free will. The drug was designed to keep the people compliant, loyal, and utterly under control. The upcoming election was merely a facade. The drug was already being deployed across New Dawn under the guise of a public health initiative. A chemical tether tying every citizen signed line to the party, says what? Ethan stared at the screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. They weren't just rigging an election, they were obliterating the very concept of free will. The question wasn't true if they would win the election, it was whether the people would ever know they lost their ability to choose. His mind raced. If the people remained unaware, they devote, as if they were making a choice, but their emotions, their very inclinations, would be dictated by the party. Ethan had once believed in the party's promises of stability and order, but this was tyranny on a scale he hadn't thought possible. Panic clawed at him, but he quickly pushed it down. He was no idealist, no revolutionary, but something had to be done. The question was, how? As he clicked through the files, trying to piece together the full scope of the operation, a name popped up that he hadn't expected. Lana Carter, the opposition candidate. She was gaining ground in the polls, despite the party's overwhelming control. Young, charismatic, with a vision of a free society, she represented everything the party despised. That's why they would never let her win. But now Ethan understood they didn't even need to steal the election. They were rigging mine. Could she be the one to stop this? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden beeping from his personal phone. Gaps. Number flashed on the screen. Gabe Turner. His childhood friend was a tech expert who had warned him about the party. Its growing influence. Ethan swiped the call. Ethan, you okay, man? Gabe's voice crackled over the line, carrying a familiar edge of concern. You've been off the grid for days. I found something, Gabe. Something big, and I need your help. A long pause followed. Then Gabe spoke, his tone serious. What are you talking about? Ethan hesitated, then let the words spill out. He told Gabe everything about the drug, about how the party was controlling the election, and how the people's minds were being manipulated. By the time he finished, his hands were trembling. Jesus. Gabe breathed. Are you telling me they were controlling emotions? How many people know about this? As far as I can tell, very few, but if they pull this off, the people won. To even know they were being manipulated. Then we've got to stop them, Gabe said firmly. I've been thinking the same thing, but I can do it alone. Ethan glanced at the screen. I need to reach Lana Carter. She's under tight security. Gabe replied, ever since she got close in the polls, the party has been keeping an eye on her. I don't care if anyone can stop this. It's Santa. 3 nights later, in a dimly lit underground parking lot beneath a disused factory on the outskirts of New Dawn, Ethan found himself face to face with Lana Carter. She was smaller than he expected, but radiated a fierce energy that instantly commanded attention. She wore a simple black coat, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense manner, but her eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the surroundings as though she half expected the party agents to jump out from the shadows at any moment. Dr. Marks, she greeted him with a nod, her voice controlled, but tinged with curiosity. Gabe says, you have something urgent to discuss. I do. Ethan glanced around nervously. Gabe had agreed to stand watch, but the sense of danger still prickled at him. What I am about to tell you can leave this room. It's bigger than your campaign. It's not about the election itself and the party's true plan. Lana crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the hood of a nearby car. I am listening. Ethan took a breath and plunged into the explanation. He told her about the emotion-altering drug, how it was being distributed under the guise of health programs, how it would manipulate voters' emotions to ensure their loyalty to the party. He showed her the files on his tablet, the formulas, the timelines for deployment, the classified communications between government officials. As he spoke, Lana's face hardened. her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the car. When? She asked sharply, her voice barely a whisper. They've already started, Ethan says, voice cracked. The full effect will hit right before Election Day. Lana stepped back, pacing for a moment, her mind clearly racing. If this is true, and I believe it is, we're not just talking about an election. We were talking about the end of freedom itself. The people want to even know they were being controlled. That's exactly it. Ethan said, we have to expose this. You have to expose this. Lana stopped pacing and fixed her gaze on him. Ethan, if we go public with this, the party will come for us. They'll come hard. We need more than just a whistleblower. We need undeniable proof. I can get it. Gabe's soft voice interrupted from the shadows as he stepped forward, his expression grim. I can hack into the government servers, pull out whatever files we need to make this public. But it's not going to be easy. Security is tighter than ever. Lana stood silent for a moment, then looked back at Ethan. Are you willing to see this through? Ethan hesitated, fear flickering in his chest, but he nodded. I am. Good, Lana said, her voice firm because from here on out there's, no turning back. The next week was a blur of tense planning and sleepless nights. Ethan, Lana, and Gabe worked in secret, gathering every scrap of evidence they could find. Gabe's hacking skills were put to the test as he infiltrated government databases, decrypting files and dodging the party surveillance system. But the closer they got to exposing the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. The party had eyes everywhere, and Ethan felt the weight of their gaze, closing in on him like a tightening noose. Every time he left his apartment, he could feel the oppressive presence of government agents watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. Then the inevitable happened. Late one night, as they were finalizing plans to broadcast the damning evidence during Lana's upcoming rally, an urgent message flashed across Gabe's screen. They were on to us, Gabe said, his voice tight with urgency. We need to move now. Before Ethan could process what was happening, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse where they had been working. The lights flickered and the door burst open. Several armed men in black tactical gear stormed in, their weapons trained on the trio. Lana grabbed Ethan's songarm, pulling him toward the back exit. We've got to go. But before they could escape, a figure stepped into their path, a woman in a sleek black coat, her eyes cold and calculating, Agent Rosaline Chen. Dr. Marks, she said calmly, her hand resting on her gun. Lana Carter, you coming with me? Ethan saw his heart pounded in his chest. They were trapped. Ethan saw his heart hammered in his chest as Agent Rosaline Chen's eyes locked onto his. Lana's grip on his arm tightened, her body coiled with tension ready to spring. The party's agents fanned out, blocking every conceivable escape route. The cold sheen of Rosaline's gun caught the dim light as she raised it, her expression unreadable. We don't want this to get messy, Rosaline said, her voice low but commanding. You come quietly and no one gets hurt. Lana shifted subtly, her eyes scanning the room for any opportunity to flee. But it was clear that the only option left was to fight or surrender. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of their situation pressing down on him like a physical force. Gabe, who had been furiously typing on his laptop in the corner, suddenly looked up, eyes wide with realization. The files, we have to upload them. Now he whispered harshly. If we go down, we at least need to take the truth with us. Lana's eyes flipped to Gabe, her decision made in an instant to do it. Before Rosaline could react, Gabe slammed his hand down on the keyboard, activating the final phase of their plan. The screen blinked, the upload bar filling slowly, painfully. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized that Gabe was putting everything on the line in that moment. The files, the proof, their very lives. Rosaline's gaze snapped to the laptop, her eyes narrowing. Stop, she shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. Lana moved like lightning, grabbing a nearby chair and swinging it toward Rosaline. The agent deflected the blow, but the moment of distraction was enough for Ethan to grab Gabe by the arm and yank him toward the side exit. The three of them bolted for the door, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them as the party stand agents opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the metal walls as they ran, their footsteps pounding against the concrete floor. Rosaline barked orders, but Ethan didn't hear the words. His focus was solely on escape. They burst out into the night air, the cool breeze a shocking contrast to the heat of their frantic dash. The dark alleyways of New Dawn stretched out before them like a labyrinth, and they didn't stop to think as they tore down the narrow street. Their pursuers were close behind, but Gabe had planned their escape route well. A series of twisting alleys and obscure corners allowed them to slip into the shadows, momentarily losing their tail. Ethan's lungs burned as they crouched behind a stack of crates in a dimly lit alley, gasping for breath. Lana leaned against the wall, her face flushed but determined. "How much of the upload got through?" she asked, her voice tight. Gabe wiped the sweat from his brow, still panting. "Enough, the evidence is out there now. The party send the plan ... It's exposed." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief washing over him. They had done it. The truth was out, but that victory was quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. They were still fugitives, and the party would stop at nothing to silence them. "We need to keep moving," Lana said, pushing off the wall and glancing around the alley. "They won to stop until we re-dead or behind bars." Ethan nodded, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. "Where do we go now?" "I have a safe house," Gabe said quietly. "It's off the grid, but we don't need to lay low for a while." The three of them slipped deeper into the maze of alleys, careful to stay out of sight. The city seemed to hum with the distant sound of sirens, the party's forces sweeping the streets in search of them. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process the events of the last few hours. They had uncovered the conspiracy, exposed it to the public, but it felt like a hollow victory. The people might now know the truth, but the party still held all the power. Hours later, they arrived at Gabe's safe house, a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, buried in a sea of dilapidated buildings. It was far from the high-tech labs and polished political offices they were used to, but it was safe for now. Lana paced the room, her frustration palpable. "We've started something, but it's not enough. The party will do damage control, spin this however they need to. We need more, something that forces them to confront the truth publicly." Gabe sat at his computer, already working on encrypting their communication. "We need to hit them where it hurts," he said without looking up. "Their infrastructure, their systems, if we can cripple their networks, expose more of their secrets, they want to be able to cover it up." Ethan sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, his head in his hand. His entire world had shifted so drastically in such a short time. He had gone from being a scientist, a man dedicated to research and discovery, to a fugitive fighting a battle he had never asked to be part of. "I don't know if I am cut out for this," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Lana stopped pacing and looked at him, her expression softening for the first time. "None of us are, Ethan, but that doesn't mean we can walk away. Not now, not after what we've seen." Ethan met her gaze, and for a brief moment, he saw the exhaustion beneath her determined exterior. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, and despite the odds, she hadn't given up. He realized then that he couldn't tie neither the fight for freedom was worth any sacrifice. Before he could respond, Gabe's screen lit up with a new message. "We've got a problem," Gabe muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "What is it?" Lana asked, moving to his side. "They've put a bounty on our heads," Gabe replied grimly. "Every mercenary and bounty hunter in the city is going to be looking for us now." Lana swore under her breath. They were getting desperate. Ethan felt a cold chill settle over him. They had expected the party to come after them, but a bounty meant they were running out of time. Every second they spent in the city was a second closer to being caught or killed. "We need to act fast," Lana said, her voice hardening. "We take the fight to them, expose them in a way they can to recover from." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes were higher than ever, but he wasn't going to back down, not now. As they made their final preparations, Ethan couldn't help but think about the future. The party had stripped people of their free will, but perhaps the fight wasn't just about exposing a conspiracy. It was about showing the people that freedom wasn't something that could be given or taken away by a government. It was something that had to be fought for, earned, and defended. The next night, they made their move. Gabe's hacking expertise had given them a window of opportunity, a weakness in the party's communications network. It was risky, but they had no choice. They infiltrated a government broadcasting station, intending to hijack the party's own media and air the damning evidence to every screen in the city. The operation was a blur of tension and rapid movements. Ethan's heart pounded as they maneuvered through the station, avoiding guards and security cameras. Gabe worked quickly, breaking into the control room and setting up the broadcast. Just as the final moments of their plan unfolded, a group of armed agents stormed the building. Among them was Rosaline Chen, her face a mask of grim determination. "You can too win this," she said coldly as she leveled her gun at them. "You think the people care about your ideals, they just want order stability, and we give that to them." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You read wrong, people want freedom, they just don't know it yet, but they will." Rosaline's gaze flickered with doubt for the briefest of moments before she steeled herself. She raised her gun, but before she could pull the trigger, Lana moved. In a split second, she disarmed Rosaline, pinning her to the ground. "You fighting for the wrong side," Lana said quietly, her voice filled with conviction. "You still have a choice." Rosaline hesitated, her eyes darting between them and the chaos unfolding around them. The doubt that had been festering inside her finally broke through with a sigh. She lowered her head, her resistance fading. The broadcast went live, every screen in New Dawn lit up with the truth footage of the party, some manipulation, the evidence of the drug, and the voices of those who had been silenced for too long. The people saw it all. As the broadcast reached its climax, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulder. The truth was out. The people could no longer be kept in the dark. But even as the victory settled over them, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The fight for freedom wasn't tied over. The party still held power, and the road ahead would be long and dangerous. As they slipped back into the shadows, leaving the broadcasting station behind, Ethan glanced at Lana. She caught his gaze and gave a small, determined nod. The price of freedom was steep, but they were willing to pay it. Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In a world where data was more powerful than weapons, elections were no longer a competition of ideas, but a battle fought with algorithm. Every decision a person made, from what they ate to how they voted, was meticulously predicted by a government that had mastered the art of manipulating information. No one questioned the results until now. Ethan Kane walked into the dimly lit command center of the Phantom Collective, the underground hacker group he'd led for nearly a decade. The walls hummed with the pulse of quantum processors, and screens displayed data feeds from every corner of the world. He rubbed his temples, staring at the election countdown. 5 days remained until the nation cast their votes, but Ethan already knew the result. The Communist Party would win again, just as they had for the past 50 years. He'd seen the same pattern play out over and over. Public opinion would waver, debates would be held, and polls would fluctuate. But it was all a charade. The government under Chairman Zhang as Iron Grip controlled the data, and in the end, the numbers always fell in their favor. Ethan glanced at a holographic projection of the vote share. His face, once ruggedly handsome, was now worn from years of battle in the shadows, his brown hair flecked with silver. The results already in, he muttered to himself. Behind him, Scifiaudiobooks entered the room, her footsteps barely audible on the polished floor. She was a woman of contradictions. Her sharp intelligence was matched only by her quiet grace. Once she had been Ethan's partner both in work and in life, but their paths had diverged years ago when she chose to remain within the government. "Still think you can stop it?" Sophia asked, her voice laced with doubt. Ethan didn't turn to look at her. "We have to try. If we don't, he expose this now, it'll never stop. People deserve to know the truth." Sophia walked over to the data stream that filled the center of the room, a shimmering web of information flowing through the air. "This system," she began, trailing off as she watched the data cascade. "It's too perfect. The team has refined it to the point where even the slightest disruption gets flagged. The algorithms predict the electorate's set behavior with 99% accuracy. You do need a miracle to break through." Ethan frowned, tapping a few commands into his personal terminal. He knew Sophia was right, but that didn't mean he would stop. There was always a crack in the system. No code was invincible, no data set flawless. "Sophia, do you ever regret it?" he asked, suddenly turning to face her. His green eyes bore into hers, searching for the woman he once knew. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to a console and began pulling up files, accessing sensitive data streams only someone on the inside could read. Ethan watched her fingers move across the holographic keys with the ease of a master, her hesitation momentarily forgotten. "I used to think this was the only way to keep order," she said, finally, her tone flat. "But now I don't know. We traded freedom for security, and I am not sure it was worth it." Ethan stood beside her watching as she pulled up voter data from the past 5 elections. So, you were helping me. Sophia hesitated again, then nodded. I don't know how long I can, but yes, I've seen things I can to ignore anymore. Ethan smiled faintly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The clock was ticking. Ethan and Sophia worked through the night, sifting through petabytes of data, searching for any evidence of tampering. They were looking for the smoking gun proof that the government had not only manipulated public opinion, but outright fabricated vote. Look at this, Sophia said, pulling up a map of voter district. See how the turnout percentages here spike? That's impossible. In a legitimate election, you'd expect some variation, but that's too clean. Ethan nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. That's hard because those votes were never cast. The data was generated, inserted into the system to create the illusion of a landslide. They didn't just influence the voters, they outright created that. Sophia's face hardened. This is the proof you need. No, Ethan corrected her. It's the proof we need. I can do this alone. Sophia gave him a tight smile. Then let's make sure the world sees it. Days passed in a blur. Every moment brought them closer to Election Day, and with each hour, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavier on Ethan's shoulder. The Phantom Collective, an invisible army of hackers scattered across the globe, had been working around the clock, but this operation was unlike anything they had ever attempted. Their plan was audacious. On Election Day, they would infiltrate the government central data hub, hijack the live vote count, and broadcast the fabricated numbers to every screen, phone, and device in the country. It would be the ultimate act of rebellion, exposing the fraudulent system for all to see. But they knew the risks. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean the end of their movement. It would mean the end of them. Chairman Zorang had never been one to show mercy. Are you sure about this? Asked one of the Phantom Collective senior members, a wiry man, known only by his handle, Ghost. We pulled this off. There's no going back. We were burning every bridge. I know, Ethan said, but this is the only way. Ghost hesitated for a moment, then nodded.
Weary with you, Kane.
All the way. Sophia, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. The real question is, how far will Sun go to stop us? Ethan turned to her, his jaw set far enough that we need to be ready for anything. Election Day arrived, and with it, the tension in the air became palpable. The streets were filled with people, their faces lit up by the holographic billboards displaying the candidate. Ethan's face flashed across the screens, but he knew better than to take comfort in the number. Every vote had already been decided, long before anyone stepped into the booth. Ethan sat in the Phantom Collective Sun Command Center, surrounded by monitors and data stream. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the vote count start to come in. The numbers were exactly what he expected. Chairman Zorang, as candidate, was ahead by a wide margin, just as predicted. Are you ready? Sophia asked, standing by his side. Ethan took a deep breath. Let's just do this. The team moved into action, their fingers flying across keyboards as they hacked into the government DAO server. It was a delicate operation, one that required precision and perfect timing. If they were discovered too early, the entire plan would collapse. Oiri and Ghost reported, his voice steady despite the tension, initiating the broadcast now. Ethan watched as the numbers on the screens began to shift, the fabricated data replaced by the real vote. It was a small change at first, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, but within moments, it became clear that something was wrong. The votes, they were changing, Sophia whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Across the country, people stared at their screens, confused as the numbers fluctuated wildly. Ethan's heart raced. This was it. They were exposing the truth, showing the world that the government had been lying to them all along. But then the screens flickered. What's happening? Ethan demanded, his voice rising in panic. Ghost's hands flew across his keyboard. We've been compromised. They were countering the hack. Ethan's blood ran cold. Chairman Zorang had anticipated their move. Sophia stepped forward, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. I can override their countermeasures, but we don't have much time. Ethan nodded, adrenaline surging through him. Do it. As Sophia worked to bypass the government, defenses, Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was their last chance. If they failed now, the truth would be buried forever. The screens flickered again, and for a brief moment, the real numbers appeared in full view. A government's reasserted control, and the fabricated data returned. Ethan slammed his fist against the console in frustration. We were losing control. Sophia didn't try to look up from her work. Just give me a little more time. But time was the one thing they didn't have. Ethan's heart raced as he watched the numbers on the screens fight for dominance, real data flashing in and out as Sophia struggled to keep their hack alive. His team had prepared for every scenario, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer speed of Song's sent counterattack. Every second, the window of opportunity shrank, and the Phantom Collective's hard-fought access was slipping away. Sophia, he shouted, gripping the edge of the console as though that alone could steady the chaos around him. I know, she snapped back, her voice sharp with tension, hands moving in a blur across the interface. She barely blinked, immersed in the battle between the algorithms they had deployed and the relentless AI defending the government's data stream. They were flooding the system with false signals. It sounded like trying to pick a lock while the door sunfire. The holographic display flickered, and for a brief moment, the real vote count, Ethan's vote count, flashed across the main screen, a dead heat, nothing like the overwhelming landslide the government was trying to project. We were so close, Ghost murmured from his station, sweat dripping down his temple. If we can hold this open for just 5 more minutes, we can flood the airwaves with the truth. Sophia muttered something under her breath, too low for Ethan to hear, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was fighting against the very system she'd helped design. Ethan could feel the weight of what they were doing, pressing down on them. All the entire collective was pushing back against a government that had perfected the manipulation of reality. Suddenly, a series of warning lights flared red across the console. The room filled with an ominous hum as the servers began to overload, their processing power strained to the brink by the digital war waging within their code. They were trying to shut us out, Ethan yelled. His heart pounded in his chest. We need to reroute. Already on it. Ghost replied, fingers flying over his keyboard. But it's not going to hold for long. These are some of the most aggressive countermeasures I've ever seen. Ethan cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. If they didn't break through, now all of their efforts would be for nothing, and the public would never see the truth. Chairman Sarin would win again, and the illusion of democracy would continue unchallenged. Sophia suddenly slammed her hand against the console, her face lit with a fierce determination. I've got a back door, she said, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and alerts. It's risky, but it'll get us deeper into the system. What kind of risk? Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. Anything Sophia had to offer at this point would be dangerous, potentially lethal. If I trigger it, we might lose the entire feed, but if we succeed, we'll break through their firewall for good. Her eyes locked onto Ethan, and he could see the resolve in her gaze. There was no going back. Ethan's throat tightened. The weight of the decision settled heavily on him, but there was no time to hesitate. Do it? Sophia's hands flew across the console, tapping in the sequence she knew from her time inside the government as inner working. She had designed the failsafe herself, never imagining she would one day use it against the very system she had built. The screens flickered again, and for a heartbeat, everything went dark. Ethan's breath caught in his chest. Had they just lost everything? Then the lights snapped back on and the vote count reappeared. But this time it wasn't terror. The government sent fabricated numbers that filled the screens. It was the truth. The votes were split, with Ethan's shares surging in real time as the legitimate data poured in. His victory, long suppressed, now blazed across the nation, Solus devices, exposing the depth of the government. Sure, we did it. Ghost whispered in disbelief, his eyes wide as he stared at the screen. We actually did it. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts. He could hardly believe it. The truth was out there for everyone to see. The government's data manipulation was exposed, and for the first time in years, the people were seeing a real election unfold before their eyes. But before he could even begin to celebrate, a sudden, sharp crackle filled the room. The main server sparked violently, smoke curling up from the console. Ethan stumbled backward, eyes wide. They were refrying the system. Sophia shouted, her hands moving frantically to contain the damage. They were trying to erase everything. No, Ethan lunged forward, grabbing for the emergency override, but it was too late. The screens began to glitch, the vote count flickering wildly once again. "They re-erasing," all the data ghost said, his voice hollow. "If they wipe the servers, we lose everything we just did." Ethan's mind raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. There had to be a way to save the information. He glanced at Sophia, who was furiously trying to stabilize the feed. "There's one more option," Sophia said, her voice strained, "but it's dangerous." "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I can force a total system shutdown, but if I do, the whole network will crash. We'd lose access permanently, and Soana's team would know exactly where we are." Ethan's breath hitched. A system shutdown would be catastrophic, not just for the Phantom Collective, but for the entire country. If they were discovered, they wouldn't just lose the election, they would lose their lives. But if they didn't act now, all the evidence they had fought so hard to reveal would disappear into the ether. "Do it," he said, his voice cold and decisive. There was no other option. Sophia nodded, her face pale but determined. She tapped in the final command, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. The room grew eerily silent as the command executed, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then the lights blinked out. The command center was plunged into darkness, the only sound the faint hum of residual power. Ethan held his breath, waiting for some sign that their plan had worked. And then, in the distance, the faintest sound of applause. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, swelling like a tide. Ethan could hardly believe what he was hearing. "They saw it," Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion. "The people saw the truth." Ethan stood frozen in place, the realization dawning on him. They had done it. The broadcast had gone out before the system crashed, and the people had seen the real vote count. But even as the applause echoed in the distance, Ethan knew the battle was far from over. The government wouldn't go down quietly. Chairman Zhaoang was still in power, and he would stop at nothing to silence those who had exposed him. "We need to move," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the moment of triumph. "They'll be coming for us." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing ahead. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Durang wouldn't he hesitate to retaliate? And their lives were now more in danger than ever. As they packed up their gear and prepared to flee, Ethan glanced at the screens one last time. The system was dead, the data erased, but the truth was out there now in the hands of the people. "We'll be ready for whatever comes next," Ethan said, his voice steady with conviction. Sophia shot him a grim smile. "We'll need to be..." Together they left the command center, stepping out into the night. The city stretched out before them, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of protest was rising. The people had seen the truth, and now there was no going back. But Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The battle for freedom had just begun.